My daughter was connected to machines that beeped in a rhythm that terrified me. Her face was wrapped in thick white gauze, and her leg was elevated in a cast that looked like it weighed a ton. I was weeping, holding the pen my son-in-law had shoved into my trembling hand, ready to sign over my life savings to save hers. But then the cheap ballpoint pen ran out of ink. I stepped out into the hallway to find another one, wiping tears from my eyes. That was when a cold, wrinkled hand shot out from the next room and grabbed my wrist with a strength that did not match its owner. It was the blind woman in room 305. She pulled me close, her cloudy eyes staring at nothing, and whispered the words that would save my life. "Run from that girl, old man. She is not in a coma." I heard her laughing the second you walked out the door. I am Moses Carter, 73 years old. For 40 years I managed logistics at the Baltimore shipping yards. My job was to spot a missing crate in a stack of 1,000 to know when a manifest was faked by a single digit. I thought I had seen every scam in the book. I thought I could spot a liar from a mile away. But I learned the hard way that the hardest lies to spot are the ones told by the people you tuck into bed at night. Before I tell you how I took down the two people I loved most in this world, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you think family loyalty has a limit. It started at 2:13 in the morning. The phone rang, cutting through the silence of my empty house like a siren. When you live alone at my age, a late-night call never means good news. It is always a death, an accident, or a wrong number. I fumbled for my glasses, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was Greg, my son-in-law. He was screaming so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. "Moses, you have to come. It is bad. It is so bad." His voice cracked, sounding like a man whose world had just ended. He told me there was a head-on collision on I-95. A drunk driver. Vanessa's car had rolled over 3 times. They were at Mercy General. He said the doctors were talking about brain swelling and emergency procedures. I did not even change out of my plaid pajama bottoms. I threw a trench coat over them, grabbed my keys, and drove my 10-year-old Buick faster than I had driven in decades. The rain was coming down hard, blurring the streetlights, but all I could see was my little girl. Vanessa was 35 now, a pharmacist with a husband and a mortgage. But in my mind, she was still the 7-year-old with pigtails who cried when her ice cream fell in the dirt. Since my wife Bernice passed 5 years ago, Vanessa was all I had. She was the only reason I kept going. When I sprinted into the trauma unit, my bad knee screamed in protest, but I ignored it. The hospital smell hit me first. That mix of bleach floor wax and old coffee. I found room 304. The scene broke me. Vanessa was lying there looking small and fragile in that big mechanical bed. Her head was completely wrapped in bandages. Her left arm was in a sling. Her right leg was casted from thigh to toe. There were tubes running into her arm and a machine monitoring her heart rate that beeped steadily. Greg was slumped in a plastic chair next to the bed, his head in his hands. When he saw me, he jumped up and hugged me. He was shaking. "Oh God, Moses, I thought I lost her." He sobbed into my coat. I patted his back, feeling a surge of pity for him. Greg was a financial advisor, a man who wore Italian suits and talked about cryptocurrency and market volatility. I never really liked him. I always felt he looked at my bank account rather than my daughter, but tonight he was just a scared husband. Then I felt it. As he hugged me, his left wrist brushed against my neck. He was wearing his Apple Watch. The screen lit up for a second. I saw him glance at it over my shoulder. It wasn't a text message. He was closing his activity rings. I pulled back, confused. Who checks their fitness goals when their wife is in a coma? But I dismissed the thought immediately. Grief makes people do strange things, I told myself. I walked to the bedside and touched Vanessa's hand. It felt warm, but limp. "Nessie, Daddy is here," I whispered. She didn't move. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen machine. Greg blew his nose into a silk handkerchief. "The doctor was just here, Moses. It is critical. They need to operate to relieve pressure on her spine or she might never walk again. But the insurance company is fighting us. They say the procedure is considered experimental for this type of injury." He looked at me with red, watery eyes. "They need a deposit, Moses. A big one. Or they won't wheel her into the OR. I maxed out my credit cards just to get her admitted. I don't have enough." "How much?" I asked. My voice sounded rusty. 50,000. Right now. I froze. I had money. I had a pension and I had the savings from selling the big house after Bernice died to move into my smaller bungalow. But $50,000 was a huge chunk of my rainy day fund. Greg saw my hesitation. He grabbed a clipboard from the end of the bed. "You don't have to transfer cash right this second," he said, speaking fast. "The hospital admin said if you sign this medical proxy and a guarantee of payment, they can start. It puts your house up as collateral just for 48 hours until I can liquidate my portfolio. Please, Moses." "She doesn't have time." He shoved the clipboard into my hands. The paper was full of dense legal text. My eyes were blurry from the rain and the tears. I squinted at the words. Lien on property. Irrevocable power of attorney. Immediate transfer of assets. These were heavy terms. In my days at the shipping yard, I would never sign a manifest without checking every single container. But this wasn't a crate of auto parts. This was my daughter. "Do it, Moses." Greg snapped, his voice suddenly losing its softness. "Do you want her to be paralyzed?" The change in his tone startled me. It was sharp, impatient. I reached into my pocket for my reading glasses, but I had left them on the nightstand at home in my rush. "I need a pen," I mumbled, patting my pockets. Greg immediately pulled a fancy gold-plated fountain pen from his jacket. "Here, use mine. Just sign on the X." I uncapped the pen. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I touched the nib to the paper. I was about to sign away the deed to the home I had worked 40 years to own. The pen scratched the paper. No ink. I shook it and tried again. Nothing. Just a dry groove in the paper. "Damn it," Greg cursed under his breath. He snatched the pen back and shook it violently. "It's out. I'll go find a nurse." "No," I said, needing a moment to breathe. The air in the room was suffocating. "I'll go. I need water anyway." I stepped out of the room before he could stop me. I needed to clear my head. The pressure was crushing my chest. I walked down the dim hallway toward the nurse's station, but it was empty. The night shift was short-staffed. I saw a pen sitting on a cart outside the room next to Vanessa's, room 305. I walked over to grab it. The door to 305 was open a crack. The room was dark, unlike my daughter's room, which was flooded with harsh fluorescent light. As I reached for the pen, a voice drifted out from the darkness. "You are the father, aren't you?" I stopped. I pushed the door open slightly. An elderly woman was sitting up in bed. She had wild gray hair and her eyes were milky white, blind. She was staring straight ahead at the wall, but her head was cocked to the side like a bird listening for a worm. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am," I said softly. "I just need a pen. My daughter's next door." The woman didn't move her body, but her hand shot out and patted the mattress. "Come here," she rasped. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. I hesitated. I needed to get back to Vanessa. But something about the woman's tone compelled me. I took a step into the room. The woman's name was written on the whiteboard on the wall. Eda May, fall risk, vision impaired. I got closer, closer. Suddenly her hand lashed out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was shocking. It was tight, painful, the desperate grip of someone drowning. "Listen to me," she hissed, pulling me down so my ear was level with her mouth. "You don't sign those papers." I tried to pull away, thinking she was confused, maybe suffering from dementia. "Ma'am, please, my daughter is hurt. I have to help her." "She isn't hurt," Eda May whispered furiously. Her blind eyes widened, looking frantic. "The walls here are thin. I have been blind for 20 years, mister." "My ears see better than your eyes ever will." I stopped struggling. "What are you talking about?" She pulled me closer until I could smell the peppermint on her breath. "About 10 minutes before you ran in here panting like a dog, that girl next door was on the phone. She wasn't moaning. She wasn't crying. She was laughing. She told someone, 'The old fool is on his way. Make sure you use the onion juice to make your eyes tear up.'" I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Onion juice. Eda May wasn't finished. And the man, the one with the heavy shoes, he told her, "Once he signs the house over, we can put him in that home on 4th Street by next week." They were eating something crunchy. Chips, I think. Does a dying woman eat potato chips? My stomach dropped. I looked back toward the door. From this angle, I could see the sliver of light from Vanessa's room. "You are confused," I stammered, but my conviction was crumbling. I saw her. She is in a cast. She is bandaged like a mummy. "Costumes," Eda May spat. I was a nurse in the army for 30 years. I know the sound of a pain pump. That machine next door, it's on demo mode. It beeps, but it isn't pumping anything. I stared at the old woman. This was insane. My daughter, my Vanessa. The girl I taught to ride a bike. The girl whose tuition I paid for by working double shifts at the docks. Eda May released my wrist. Her voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. Go back in there. Drop something. Make a noise. Watch her feet. If her legs are really broken, she won't move. But if she is startled, the body doesn't lie even if the mouth does. Test her, old man, before you sign your life away. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding a rhythm of denial. No, it couldn't be. Vanessa loved me. Greg was annoying, but he wasn't a monster. This was just a crazy old woman's hallucination. But then I remembered the Apple Watch. I remembered the cologne instead of sweat. I remembered the urgent paperwork that Greg didn't want me to read. I gripped the cheap plastic pen I had found on the cart. It felt heavy in my hand. I walked back to room 304. Greg looked up as I entered. He had wiped his eyes and was tapping his foot impatiently. Did you find one? Hurry, Moses. The nurse just came by. They are losing patience. I looked at the bed. Vanessa hadn't moved an inch. I walked over to the side of the bed right next to her broken leg. I held the pen up. I'm ready, I said. Then I deliberately let my heavy metal car keys slip from my other hand. They crashed onto the linoleum floor with a loud, sharp clang right next to the bed frame. It happened in a split second. A reflex. Under the thick white sheet, Vanessa's shattered right foot twitched. It jerked inward away from the sudden noise. A paralyzed leg doesn't jump. A broken leg screams in agony if it moves that fast. But Vanessa remained silent. Eyes closed. Fake coma. The blind woman was right. I looked up at Greg. He was staring at the keys on the floor, then at me. For a second, the mask slipped. His eyes weren't sad. They were cold, calculating. Sign it, Moses, he said. It sounded less like a request and more like a command. I gripped the pen. I knew exactly what I had to do. But I wasn't going to sign my name. I was going to sign a declaration of war. I stood there for a moment, the echo of my keys hitting the floor still ringing in my ears. That tiny twitch of her foot was like a lightning bolt that illuminated the entire dark room. But I knew better than to scream. In my 40 years at the shipyard, I learned that when you catch a thief, you do not yell. You wait. You gather evidence. You let them dig their own grave. I bent down slowly, groaning a little to emphasize my age, and picked up my keys. When I straightened up, I put on the mask of a confused, terrified father. I looked at Greg. The mask of grief he wore was starting to slip. The sweat on his forehead was not from sorrow. It was the cold, sticky sweat of a gambler who just pushed all his chips into the center of the table. Sign it, Moses, Greg said again. His voice was tight. He tapped the paper with his fingernail. The doctors are waiting. Every second we waste is brain function she is losing. I looked at the clipboard. The letters were swimming before my eyes, not because my vision was failing, but because rage was making my blood boil. I needed to stall. I needed to see more. That twitch was not enough. I needed to be certain before I declared war on my own flesh and blood. I cannot sign this, Greg, I said, my voice trembling. I made sure to sound weak. I made sure to sound like the helpless old man they thought I was. What do you mean you can't sign it? Greg snapped. The loving son-in-law act evaporated instantly. His eyes narrowed into slits. I squinted at the paper, bringing it close to my nose. I left my reading glasses at home on the nightstand. The print is too small. This is a power of attorney, Greg. It gives you control over my house, my pension, my life insurance. I need to read the terms. I promised Bernice I would never sign legal documents without reading them twice. Greg let out a sound that was half sigh, half growl. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of his cologne was overpowering, a musk that cost more than my first car. "We do not have time for you to play Lawyer Moses," he shouted, causing a passing nurse to glance into the room. He lowered his voice to a menacing hiss. "Your daughter is dying. Do you understand that her brain is swelling against her skull? Do you want to be the reason she ends up a vegetable? Do you want to explain to her why you were too cheap to save her because you couldn't read the fine print?" His cruelty was breathtaking. It was a physical blow. He knew exactly where to strike my love for her, my fear of failing her as a protector. A younger Moses would have punched him in the throat, but the Moses standing there took a deep breath and played the pawn. I just want to be sure, I stammered, backing away slightly until my legs hit the side of the hospital bed. I rested my hand on the mattress right next to Vanessa's hip. I felt the vibration. It was faint, but it was there, a rhythmic thumping. Greg turned away, running his hands through his hair, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. I can't believe this, he muttered to the wall. I simply cannot believe this. While his back was turned, I saw my opportunity. Oh no, I gasped. I let my regular distance glasses slip from my nose. They clattered onto the linoleum and slid under the bed. My glasses, I cried out. Greg spun around. Jesus Christ, Moses. You are a disaster today. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I apologized, dropping to my knees. My joints popped audibly. I crawled on the cold floor, reaching under the bed frame. Leave them, Greg barked. I will buy you a new pair. Just get up and sign the damn paper. Just a second, I said, my voice muffled by the bed sheets. I see them. They slid back here. I was under the bed now. The smell of antiseptic floor wax was stinging my nose. I wasn't looking for my glasses. I was looking at my daughter. From this angle, I could see what was hidden by the thick blankets above. Vanessa's left hand, the one that was supposed to be paralyzed, was hanging off the side of the mattress, hidden from the door's view. It wasn't limp. Her fingers were tapping against the metal rail of the bed. Tap, 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 tap. It was a rhythm. I looked up at the underside of the mattress. I looked at the machinery. And then I saw the wire. A thin white wire ran from under her pillow down the side of the bed and into the pocket of her hospital gown. It was an earbud wire. I shifted my gaze to Greg's feet. He was standing by the window now, staring out at the rain. I could see he was wearing his AirPods, the noise-canceling ones. And then I heard it. Because I was on the floor, the acoustics were different. I could hear the tinny leakage of sound coming from Greg's ears. It was a heavy bass beat. Some modern hip-hop track he liked to blast in his car. I looked back at Vanessa's hand. Tap, 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 tap. She was tapping in perfect sync with the music her husband was listening to. They were sharing a playlist. She wasn't in a coma. She wasn't dying. She was bored. She was lying there listening to music, waiting for her father to sign away his home so she could stop acting. The realization hit me harder than any physical pain I had ever known. It felt like my heart simply stopped beating. This wasn't just greed, this was hatred. To do this, to put me through this hell, you have to hate someone. You have to view them not as a person, but as an obstacle to be removed. I remembered teaching her to walk. I remembered her crying when she didn't get into her first-choice college and me holding her until she fell asleep. I remembered the pride in her eyes when she graduated pharmacy school. Where did that girl go? When did she die? Because the woman in this bed was a stranger, a monster created by entitlement and married to a parasite. I found my glasses. I gripped them so hard I almost bent the frame. I took a breath. I had to get out of here. If I stayed, if I looked at her face one more time, I would lose control. I would rip the IVs out of her arm and expose them right there. And if I did that, Greg would call security. He had the medical proxy paperwork halfway done. He had the narrative. He would say I was hysterical, senile, violent. They would lock me up and he would win. I had to be smarter. I had to be the fox, not the lion. I crawled back out from under the bed. I stood up, dusting off my knees. I found them, I said. My voice was calm now. Dead calm. Greg was back in my face. Instantly the pen extended like a weapon. Good. Great. Now sign. I looked him in the eye. I looked past the fear he was trying to project and saw the arrogance underneath. I can't, Greg. His face turned purple. What I showed him, my glasses. The lens had popped out when they hit the floor. I can't see a thing, I lied. Without these, the paper is just a gray blur. And I can't sign what I can't see. It wouldn't be legal anyway. The notary would reject it if I can't verify the text. Greg looked like he was about to strangle me. Just sign your name on the line. I shook my head stubbornly. Number 1, I have to go home. I have my spare reading glasses in the desk drawer. It is only 20 minutes away. I will drive back, get them, and come right back. I turned to leave. Greg grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, hurting my bicep. If you walk out that door, Moses, and she dies while you are gone, that is on you. You hear me? You will be her murderer. I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his face. I will take that risk, I said softly. I pulled my arm free. It wasn't a violent jerk, but a firm, decisive movement that surprised him. I walked to the door. I did not look back at the bed. I did not look back at the daughter I was leaving behind, because I knew she wasn't there. As I reached the hallway, I heard Greg kick the trash can. "Hurry up, old man," he screamed after me. I walked down the corridor, my limp more pronounced as the adrenaline began to fade. I passed room 305. The bed was empty now. The nurses were stripping the sheets. Eda May was gone. I walked out into the rain. The cold water felt good on my face. It washed away the fake tears. I got into my Buick. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't going home to get glasses. I was going home to load my shotgun, not to shoot them. No death was too easy for them. I was going to kill the life they thought they were about to inherit. I was going to kill their future. I started the engine. The old V6 roared to life. "I am coming for you," I whispered to the empty car, "and you won't even see me coming." The drive back to my house felt longer than any shift I ever worked at the shipping yards. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour, drumming against the roof of my Buick like thousands of nervous fingers. My mind was still back in that hospital room, replaying the sight of Vanessa's foot twitching in time to the music. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. It was bitter and cold. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of ash, trying to keep the car steady on the slick asphalt. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always did. A modest brick bungalow with a porch that Bernice had insisted on painting white every spring. It was the only thing I had left of her. But as I turned off the engine, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The porch light was off. I always left it on. Always. It was a habit from when Vanessa was a teenager, coming home late from study groups. I never broke that habit, even after she moved out, even after Bernice passed. I stepped out of the car, ignoring the rain soaking through my coat. I walked up the steps, my hand reaching into my pocket for my keys. But I didn't need them. The front door was unlatched. It wasn't kicked in. There were no splinters on the frame. The lock hadn't been picked. Someone had used a key. And there were only 3 keys to this house in existence. One was in my pocket. One was in a lockbox at the bank. And the third one was on a keychain with a little pink rabbit charm that belonged to Vanessa. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned a sound that usually meant safety, but tonight sounded like a warning. I didn't call out. I didn't ask if anyone was home. I knew the answer. The silence inside was heavy, thick with the presence of intruders who had recently fled. I reached for the baseball bat I kept behind the umbrella stand, my old fingers wrapping around the wood with a familiarity I hadn't felt in years. I moved through the hallway. The living room was the first stop. The 60-inch television I had bought for myself last Christmas was still mounted on the wall. My laptop was sitting on the coffee table untouched. The antique silver candlesticks Bernice loved were still on the mantel. A common thief takes the easy money. They grab electronics jewelry cache. They smash and grab. But this was different. This was surgical. I moved deeper into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a rage that was growing colder and sharper by the second. I walked past the kitchen. The drawers were open, but the silverware wasn't missing. They had been rifled through, searching for something specific. I headed straight for the back room, my home office. This was my sanctuary. It was where I kept the records of 40 years of hard work. Tax returns, pension statements, the deed to the house, the bonds I had bought for my grandchildren if I ever had any. The door to the office was wide open. I stepped inside and felt the air leave my lungs. It looked like a hurricane had spawned inside the room. My filing cabinets were pulled open, folders spilled onto the floor like guts. Papers were everywhere. Bank statements from 1998, insurance policies, medical records. They hadn't just looked, they had hunted. They were looking for the numbers. They were looking for the net worth. They wanted to know exactly how much the old man was worth before they pulled the plug. I knelt down, picking up a folder labeled life insurance. It was empty. The policy document was gone. I stood up, my knees cracking, and looked at the closet. I pushed aside the heavy winter coats I stored there. Behind them, bolted to the floor, was my safe. It was an old Century model, fireproof and heavy as hell. The digital keypad was blinking red, locked out. I leaned in closer. I could see the smudge marks on the keys. They were oily, frantic. Someone had tried to punch in the code. Not once, but multiple times. I stared at the numbers. The smudge was heaviest on 4, 2, and 9. Bernice's birthday, April 29th. Only family knew that. A stranger would try 1, 2, 3, 4 or 0000. But the intruder knew enough to try the sentimental numbers. They knew me. They thought I was a sentimental old fool who used his dead wife's birthday for everything. And they were almost right. That used to be the code. But I changed it 3 years ago when I started reading about cybersecurity in a magazine. I reached out and typed in the new code. The mechanism clicked a solid, reassuring sound. I pulled the handle. Inside, the deed to the house was still there. The stack of savings bonds was untouched. The folder containing my will was sitting right on top. They hadn't gotten in. That blinking red light meant they had tried too many times and the system had locked down for 15 minutes. They must have heard my car pulling into the driveway and bolted out the back door. I sat down in my office chair, surrounded by the debris of my life. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The accident, the hospital, the rush. It was all a play. A coordinated attack. Vanessa plays the victim in the hospital to draw me out. Greg keeps me occupied, shoving papers in my face, trying to get me to sign away the house legally. Meanwhile, someone else, maybe Greg's friend, maybe a hired hand, or maybe Greg himself, before he rushed to the hospital, came here to secure the physical assets. They wanted it all. They didn't just want the house, they wanted the paper trail. They wanted to make sure that when I was accidentally deemed incompetent, or when I tragically died from stress, there would be no questions about who owned what. I looked at the mess on the floor. It was a violation. This house was the one thing I had kept pure. It was where Bernice and I had danced in the kitchen. It was where we had paid off the mortgage 5 years early, celebrating with cheap champagne and pizza. And they had walked in here with muddy shoes and dirty intentions, treating my legacy like a carcass to be scavenged. I closed the safe and locked it. Then I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I changed the combination again. This time I didn't use a birthday. I didn't use an anniversary. I used the date of the Battle of Gettysburg, a date of war. But I knew this wasn't over. If they couldn't get in tonight, they would try again. They were desperate. Greg's panic at the hospital wasn't just acting. It was the desperation of a man who owes money to bad people. I had seen that look on the docks plenty of times. Men like that don't stop. They escalate. I needed eyes. I needed to see them when they thought I wasn't looking. I remembered the package that had arrived 2 days ago. It was sitting on the kitchen counter unopened. I had ordered it after seeing a news report about porch pirates stealing packages in the neighborhood. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the box. Inside was a tiny wireless security camera. It was designed to look like a black button, something you could hide anywhere. The box said it had a motion sensor and night vision linking directly to an app on my phone. I wasn't a tech genius, but I could follow instructions. I downloaded the app on my old Samsung. It took me 10 minutes to sync it up. I went back to the office. I couldn't put it somewhere obvious. If they came back, they would look for cameras. I needed a vantage point that felt natural. I looked at the bookshelf against the wall. It was filled with old encyclopedias and my collection of naval history books. I pulled out a thick volume on the history of the Panama Canal. I wedged the tiny camera between the spine of that book and a biography of Martin Luther King Jr. The black lens blended perfectly with the shadows of the bookshelf. From here, it had a perfect view of the safe and the doorway. I checked the feed on my phone. The image was grainy but clear. I could see the mess on the floor. I could see my own face looking tired and old, staring back at the lens. I didn't clean up the mess. That was a strategic decision. If I cleaned it up, they would know I knew. They would know I was on to them. I had to play the part. I had to be the confused old man who came home, saw a mess, and maybe thought he left a window open or that the wind blew some papers around. Or maybe the old man was too senile to even notice. I left the papers scattered. I left the drawers open. I walked back to the living room and sat in my recliner. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Before it was the silence of loneliness. Now it was the silence of a hunter waiting in a blind. I pulled out my phone and looked at the picture of Vanessa I kept as my wallpaper. She was smiling, wearing her graduation cap. I stared at it for a long time, trying to find traces of the monster she had become. I pressed my thumb on the screen and deleted the photo. Then I opened the contacts list. I scrolled past Greg and Vanessa. I stopped at a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Saul Goodman. He wasn't the guy from the TV show, though he liked the joke. He was a disbarred lawyer who worked out of a strip mall laundromat. He was greasy, he was unethical, and he was the only man I knew who hated the system as much as I did. I didn't call him yet. It was 4:00 a.m. But I saved the number to my speed dial. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the rain and waited for the morning. They thought they were playing a game with a senile old man. They forgot that before I was a manager, I was a foreman, and before that, I was a soldier, and a soldier defends his post. My phone buzzed. A notification from the security app, motion detected. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the screen. It wasn't the office camera. It was the notification from the front door sensor I had installed years ago and forgot about. The front door was opening again. I gripped the baseball bat. I didn't turn on the light. I sat in the dark watching the shadow lengthen across the hallway floor. They had come back to finish the job. But this time, I was the one waiting in the dark. The morning sun didn't bring any warmth. It just turned the gray rain into a thick, suffocating fog that clung to the streets of Baltimore. I hadn't slept more than an hour. I spent the night staring at the grainy black and white feed from the hidden camera in my library, waiting for the intruders to return, but the house remained silent. At 6 in the morning, I went to the kitchen and made a pot of grits. It was Bernice's recipe, slow-cooked with a little butter and salt, the kind of food that sticks to your ribs and reminds you that you are still alive. I scooped a generous portion into a plastic Tupperware container. I wasn't hungry. The food wasn't for me. It was for the woman in room 305. Eda May, the blind woman who had saved me from signing away my life. She was the only ally I had in this nightmare, the only person who saw the truth without eyes. I needed to talk to her. I needed to know exactly what she heard, every whisper, every name, every detail of the plot my daughter and son-in-law were spinning. I needed ammunition. I drove back to Mercy General, the Tupperware warm on the seat beside me. The hospital parking lot was full of shift-change traffic nurses looking exhausted as they walked to their cars. I navigated the familiar hallways, my bad knee aching with the dampness. I bypassed the elevators and took the stairs, not wanting to run into Greg before I was ready. When I reached the 3rd floor, I walked straight past Vanessa's room. I didn't even glance at the door. I went directly to room 305. I pushed the door open, a smile already forming on my face, ready to offer the warm breakfast as a peace offering. The smile died on my lips. The room was empty, and I don't mean the patient was in the bathroom or down the hall for tests. I mean the room was sterilized. The bed was stripped to the bare mattress. The bedside table was wiped clean. The whiteboard that had Eda May's name on it was blank, smelling of fresh chemical cleaner. It was as if she had never existed. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I spun around and marched to the nurse's station. A young nurse with purple braids was typing on a computer, sipping an iced coffee. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The patient in 305. Ms. Eda May. Where is she?" The nurse didn't even look up. "Discharged. Discharged," I repeated. "She was a fall risk. She was blind. She told me she had no family. Who discharged her?" The nurse finally looked at me, annoyed. "Are you a relative? I am her friend." I lied. I brought her breakfast. She checked the screen, tapping a few keys. She was transferred. Emergency transfer order came through at 3 this morning. Her court-appointed guardian authorized it. They moved her to a specialized memory care facility in Dundalk. 3 in the morning. "You don't move an 80-year-old woman at 3 in the morning unless you are trying to hide her." "Guardian?" I asked. "She said she didn't have anyone." The nurse shrugged, losing interest. "The state assigns professional guardians for indigent seniors. It says here, Apex Senior Services. Look, sir, I have rounds to do." Apex Senior Services. The name rang a bell, a discordant, ugly bell in the back of my mind. I walked away from the desk, pulling out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. I typed the name into Google. Apex Senior Services. Address 400 Light Street, Suite 500. I froze in the middle of the hallway, causing a janitor to swerve his mop bucket around me. 400 Light Street. I knew that building. It was a glass and steel tower downtown. It was the same building where Greg used to work as a junior associate before he got fired for ethical inconsistencies, a nice way of saying he was stealing clients. I dug deeper. I searched for the registered agent of Apex Senior Services. It took me a few minutes of navigating state records on my slow phone browser. There it was. The registered agent was a shell company, Blue Harbor Holdings. And the address for Blue Harbor was a P.O. box in Delaware, but the filing attorney, the name at the bottom of the incorporation documents, was a man named Richard Sterling. Rick Sterling, Greg's old college roommate, the one who was the best man at my daughter's wedding, the one who slapped me on the back and called me Pop. The picture clicked into focus, sharp and terrifying. This wasn't just about my house. This was a ring, a predatory network. They target isolated seniors like Eda May, gain guardianship, strip their assets, and shove them into cheap facilities to rot. Eda May wasn't just a witness to my tragedy, she was a victim of theirs. And because she heard too much, because she warned me, they made her disappear in the middle of the night. They were cleaning up loose ends, and I was the biggest loose end of all. Moses. The voice boomed down the corridor. I looked up. Greg was standing outside Vanessa's room. He looked terrible, but in a way that seemed rehearsed. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, his hair messy. He looked like the picture of a distraught husband ready for his close-up. "Where the hell have you been?" he hissed, storming toward me. "I have been calling you for hours. Your phone goes straight to voicemail." I put my phone in my pocket. "I was at home, Greg. Sleeping. Old men need sleep. Sleeping." He looked incredulous. "While your daughter fights for her life." He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the room. "We don't have time for this. The doctor was just here. The situation has changed. It's worse, Moses. It's so much worse." He dragged me into the room. Vanessa was still there in the exact same position as yesterday. The machine was still beeping. But now there was a new prop. A large, ominous-looking monitor had been wheeled next to her head, displaying complex waves that meant absolutely nothing to me. "Look at the intracranial pressure," Greg pointed at the screen. "It's spiking. The swelling isn't going down. The doctor says if they don't operate within 6 hours, she will suffer permanent cognitive damage. She will forget how to speak. She will forget us." He turned to me, his eyes wide and wet. "They need to do a craniotomy. They need to remove a piece of her skull to let the brain expand." I looked at the bed. I looked at the unconscious woman who I knew could dance to hip-hop when the door was closed. "Do it, then," I said coldly. "Tell them to operate." Greg let out a frustrated sound like a tire losing air. "I told you yesterday, the insurance denied it. They are calling it elective because she is stable right now. They won't cover it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It looked official. It had the hospital logo on it. The hospital demands an upfront payment of $150,000, or a verified asset guarantee. He slammed the paper against the wall near my head. 150,000 Moses. I don't have it. I have 10 grand in checking. That's it. He got closer, his breath hot on my face. "You are the only one who can save her. You own your house free and clear. It's worth 400,000 easily. We need to take a reverse mortgage or an emergency equity line." I stared at him. The audacity was staggering. He wasn't asking for a few thousand to cover a deductible. He was going for the kill shot. He wanted the entire equity of my home. If I signed that the money would go into an account he controlled, and then Vanessa would miraculously recover without surgery, and the money would vanish into offshore gambling accounts or crypto wallets. "I need to see the denial letter from the insurance company," I said calmly. Greg blinked. "What, the denial letter?" "In writing. And I want to speak to the hospital billing administrator directly. I spent 40 years in logistics, Greg. I don't move a single crate without seeing the manifest. I am not authorizing a $100,000 transaction based on your word." Greg's face darkened. The sadness vanished, replaced by a pure, ugly rage. He took a step back, looking at me with disgust. "You selfish old bastard. Your daughter is lying there with her brain being crushed, and you want to do paperwork. You want to audit the file." I crossed my arms. "Yes, that is exactly what I want." Greg laughed a dry, humorless sound. "You think you are so smart. You think you can just sit on your hoard like a dragon while she dies." "Fine." He pulled out his phone and checked the time. "It is 9 a.m. The surgeon goes off shift at noon. If we don't have the funding secured by 12, they cancel the OR slot. And if she dies, or if she wakes up and doesn't know her own name, I will make sure everyone knows it was because her father loved his brick house more than his own flesh and blood. He pointed a finger at my chest. You have 3 hours, Moses. Go to the bank. Get the line of credit. Or say goodbye to her. He turned his back on me and sat down in the chair next to Vanessa, taking her hand in a gesture of fake devotion. I looked at them. The tableau was perfect. The grieving husband, the dying wife, the villainous father. I turned and walked out. I wasn't going to the bank. I wasn't going to get a loan. I had 3 hours, not to save her, but to destroy him. I walked out of the hospital and into the cold morning air. I took out my phone and dialed the number I had saved the night before. Saul, I said when the voice on the other end answered with a cough. Yeah, who's this? It's Moses Carter. You still hate insurance companies. I hate everybody, Moses. Especially before my second coffee. I have a job for you. And I have a name. Apex Senior Services. There was a silence on the other end, then a low whistle. Moses, my friend Saul said, his voice suddenly sharp and awake. If you are messing with Apex, you aren't looking for a lawyer. You are looking for a war. I looked back up at the third-floor window of the hospital. I am already at war, Saul. I just need to know where the enemy buried the bodies. Meet me at the diner on 4th in 20 minutes, Saul said, and bring cash. I hung up. I had a lead. I had a team. And I had a deadline. Noon. Greg thought he had given me an ultimatum, but all he had done was set the timer on his own destruction. Greg chose a restaurant called the Gilded Steer for our meeting. It was the kind of place where the lighting was so dim you needed a flashlight to read the menu, and the waiters moved around like ghosts in tuxedos. The smell of truffle oil and aged beef was thick in the air, a scent that usually made my mouth water, but tonight it just smelled like corruption. I sat in a leather booth that felt like it was trying to swallow me whole, my hands folded on top of the white tablecloth. I was wearing my Sunday suit, the one Bernice bought me for our 40th anniversary. It was a little tight around the shoulders now, but wearing it felt like armor. Greg sat across from me. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine, but not in a good way. His suit was too shiny, his watch was too big, and his smile was too wide for a man whose wife was supposedly fighting for her life in a hospital bed a few miles away. He had ordered a bottle of Cabernet that cost $300. I watched him swirl the red liquid in the glass, watching the legs of the wine drip down the crystal. He looked at that wine with more affection than he had ever looked at my daughter. You have to eat, Moses, he said, pushing a plate of calamari toward me. You need your strength. This ordeal is taking a toll on all of us. I looked at the fried squid. I felt nauseous. I am not hungry, Greg, I said, my voice low and steady. I just want to see the paperwork. You said you had the new loan documents ready. Greg sighed a theatrical exhale that shook his shoulders. He took a long sip of wine, savoring it before reaching into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and dropped them onto the table with a heavy thud. It is all here, he said, his tone shifting from solicitous to businesslike. I managed to get a rush approval on a bridge loan. It is a high-interest product, I won't lie to you, but it is fast. We can have the funds wired to the hospital by tomorrow morning, but they need the deed to your house as the primary collateral. I picked up the top page. It was a lien. A voluntary lien that would give the lender the right to foreclose on my home if I missed a single payment. And looking at the interest rate, missing a payment wasn't a possibility. It was a guarantee. This is a predatory loan, Greg, I said, looking over my reading glasses at him. 30% interest. You are asking me to sign a death warrant for my financial future. Greg leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Moses, look at me. This isn't about finance. This is about Vanessa. Do you know what the doctor told me an hour ago? Her brain swelling isn't going down. She is drifting in and out of consciousness. She was asking for you, Moses. She was crying out for her daddy. He paused for effect, letting the guilt hang in the air between us like cigar smoke. She wants to see you, he whispered. But I told her you were busy securing her future. Don't make me a liar, Moses. I stared at him. I had spent 40 years negotiating contracts with union bosses and shipping magnates. I knew when I was being hustled. But the mention of Vanessa, the image of her suffering, still had the power to make my hands shake. I want to talk to her, I said. Greg blinked, surprised. Now, yes, now. You said she was conscious. Call her. Greg hesitated. His eyes darted to the left, a classic tell. He was calculating the risk, but he knew he couldn't refuse. If he refused, I walked. Okay, he said, pulling out his iPad. But keep it brief. She is very weak. The light hurts her eyes, so she might be wearing her protective glasses. He tapped the screen and propped the tablet up against the wine bottle. It rang 3 times. Then the screen filled with an image that was meant to break my heart. Vanessa was lying back against a white pillow. Her head was still wrapped in those dramatic bandages. She was wearing large, dark sunglasses that covered half her face. Her mouth was downturned, trembling. "Daddy," her voice cracked. It sounded tinny through the tablet speakers. "Daddy, are you there? It hurts so much." I leaned in closer to the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Seeing her like that, even suspecting what I suspected, was visceral. It triggered every protective instinct I had. "I am here. Baby girl," I said softly. "I am right here with Greg." "Is everything okay?" she wheezed. "Did you sign the papers?" The doctor said, "If they don't operate soon." She broke off into a fit of coughing that sounded dry and forced. Greg reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His palm was sweaty. "See? She is terrified. Moses, be a hero. Tell her you did it." I looked at the screen again. I looked hard. The lighting in the video was strange. Hospitals have fluorescent lights, harsh white, unforgiving. But the light reflecting off Vanessa's face was warm, golden. It flickered slightly like candlelight. And then I saw it. Vanessa turned her head slightly to cough again. The angle of her dark sunglasses shifted. The lenses were polarized, acting like mirrors. In the reflection of her left lens, I saw the room she was in. It wasn't a hospital room. There were no machines. There were no IV poles. In the reflection, I saw a wooden lattice wall. I saw a fern with long green fronds. And walking past in the background, distorted by the curve of the lens but unmistakable, was a person in a white uniform. But it wasn't a nurse's scrub. It was a tunic. And on the back of the tunic, embroidered in gold thread, was a logo. It was a lotus flower. I knew that logo. Bernice used to go there for her birthday once a year. It was the Serenity Spa at the Four Seasons Hotel. It was the most expensive spa in the city. And there was one more thing. On the table next to Vanessa, barely visible in the corner of the frame, was a glass. It wasn't a plastic hospital cup with a bendy straw. It was a flute, and inside it bubbles were rising. Champagne. My daughter wasn't fighting for her life. She was sipping champagne at a 5-star spa while her husband tried to steal my house over a $300 bottle of wine. The rage that hit me then was different from the anger I felt before. It was colder. It was absolute. It was the feeling of a door slamming shut forever. "Daddy," Vanessa whined, "why aren't you saying anything?" I looked at Greg. He was watching me with a predatory intensity, waiting for me to break. I reached out and slowly closed the cover of the iPad. The screen went black. Vanessa's voice was cut off mid-whine. Greg's eyes widened. "What are you doing? She was talking to you." I sat back in the booth. I felt incredibly calm. The kind of calm you feel right before a storm hits. I picked up the stack of loan documents. I weighed them in my hand. "I am not signing these, Greg." Greg's face turned a blotchy red. "What, are you insane? You just saw her. You saw her suffering." I saw a reflection. "Greg," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the restaurant noise like a knife. I saw a lotus flower. I saw a waiter. And I saw a glass of champagne. Greg froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. "I know where she is," I continued. "She is at the Serenity Spa, probably the Diamond Suite." "That is the one with the lattice walls, isn't it? Bernice always wanted to book that one, but we never had the money. It cost $2,000 a night." I tossed the papers back at him. They slid across the table, knocking over his wine glass. The red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, looking like a fresh wound. "You are paying for that. With my money, aren't you? The deposit I gave you yesterday?" Greg stared at the spreading stain. For a moment, he looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. But then his expression shifted. The charm vanished. The fake concern evaporated. What was left was something ugly and hard. He slammed his hand down on the table. The cutlery rattled. People at the nearby tables turned to look, but Greg didn't care anymore. "You listen to me, you senile old bat," he hissed, leaning over the table, ignoring the wine dripping onto his expensive suit. "You think you are clever. You think you caught us. It doesn't matter." He jabbed a finger in my face. We have medical power of attorney. We have the guardianship filing in process. By tomorrow morning, the court will declare you incompetent. I have 3 doctors on my payroll who will testify that you are suffering from advanced dementia. They will say you are paranoid, delusional, violent." He laughed a short, cruel bark. Who are they going to believe, Moses? A successful financial advisor and a pharmacist, or a 73-year-old retired laborer who thinks his daughter is faking a coma? You are done. You are finished. I tried to do this the nice way. I tried to let you keep your dignity, but you forced my hand. He stood up, buttoning his stained jacket. I am going to take everything, Moses, the house, the pension, the car, and I am going to put you in the cheapest, filthiest state facility I can find. And Vanessa. She won't visit. She hates you. She has hated you for years because you are tight-fisted and judgmental. She can't wait to be rid of you. I looked up at him. I didn't blink. Is that so? I asked. Yes, that is so. Enjoy your calamari, Moses. It is the last meal you will ever choose for yourself. Greg turned and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. I sat there for a moment, watching the wine drip from the edge of the table onto the floor. Drip, drip, drip. The waiter rushed over, looking panicked. Sir, I am so sorry. Is everything all right? I looked at the young man. He looked terrified that I was going to make a scene. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I took out a $100 bill and placed it on the dry part of the tablecloth. Everything is fine, son, I said. In fact, everything is finally clear. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. Greg thought he had just delivered a checkmate. He thought he had crushed me, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had told me his plan. He told me about the doctors. He told me about the timeline. He told me exactly what I needed to fight. I walked out of the Gilded Steer. The night air was cool. I wasn't going home to sleep. I had a war to plan, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I pulled out my phone and dialed Saul. Wake up, counselor, I said as I walked toward my car. The price just went up, and I know where she is. I spent the rest of the night organizing my defense. I printed out bank statements, highlighted the suspicious transfers, and wrote down a timeline of events on a yellow legal pad. I was ready to go to the police station myself as soon as the sun came up. I was going to beat them to the punch. I was going to expose the fraud before they could file their papers. But I underestimated how fast a desperate man moves, and I underestimated how easily the system can be weaponized against a black man in his 70s living alone. At 7:15 in the morning, I was finishing my second cup of coffee when the room suddenly flooded with blue and red light. I walked to the window. 2 police cruisers were parked diagonally across my driveway, blocking my Buick. A generic white sedan with a state seal on the door was parked behind them. My stomach turned over. They were not here to take my report. I opened the front door before they could knock. I wanted to show them I was calm. I was in control. I was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, looking every bit the retired manager I was. Officer Miller, a young man who looked like he had just started shaving, had his hand resting near his holster. Behind him stood a woman with a clipboard and a look of practiced pity on her face. She wore an ID badge around her neck. Department of Social Services. Adult Protective Services. Mr. Carter, the woman asked. Her voice was the high-pitched, slow tone people use for toddlers and the hearing impaired. I am Brenda Jenkins from APS. We received a call concerning your welfare. I am fine. Ms. Jenkins, I said, standing tall. I am perfectly healthy. You can see that. Officer Miller stepped forward. Sir, we have a court order authorizing an emergency wellness check. We also have a report that there is a firearm in the house and that you have made specific threats of violence against your family members. My blood ran cold. Threats? I have never threatened anyone in my life, I said, keeping my hands visible. My daughter is in the hospital. I am the victim here. Ms. Jenkins sighed. She looked at me with sad eyes. Mr. Carter, confusion and paranoia are common symptoms of your condition. Your son-in-law, Mr. Miller, provided us with audio evidence. She pulled out a digital recorder and pressed play. The voice that came out of the tiny speaker was mine. There was no doubt about it. But the words were chopped up. It was a Frankenstein monster of sentences I had spoken over the last 2 days, stitched together to paint me as a madman. I heard my voice say, I am coming for you. Death is too easy. I will kill the life. I recognized the phrases. I had whispered them in my car. I had said them at the restaurant. But then came the kicker. The recording continued with a sound of something racking, a shotgun slide. And then my voice again screaming, "Vanessa, I am going to end it." That last part was fake. Or it was from years ago when I was talking about ending a subscription or a contract spliced out of context. But to the officer and the social worker, it sounded like a confession of premeditated murder. "That is doctored," I shouted, losing my composure for the first time. "That is a lie. He recorded me without my consent and edited it." Officer Miller raised his hand. "Sir, calm down. Do you have a shotgun in the house?" I hesitated. If I lied, they would find it, and I would be a liar. If I told the truth, I was the man on the tape. "I have a Remington 8.7. Oh, for home defense," I said. "It is legal. I have a permit." "Is it loaded?" Miller asked. "Yes," I said. "I loaded it last night because someone broke into my house." Ms. Jenkins made a note on her clipboard. "Paranoid delusions of home invasion. Access to loaded weapons." "No," I stepped forward. "It wasn't a delusion." "Look at my office. The lock is broken." "Sir, step back," Miller barked. He moved fast. Before I could explain, he spun me around and pushed me against the wall. I felt the cold metal of handcuffs clicking onto my wrists. My bad shoulder screamed in pain. "I am not arresting you, Mr. Carter," Miller said, patting me down, "but I am detaining you for your own safety and the safety of others while we secure the weapon." They marched me into my own living room and sat me on the sofa. I watched as they went into my bedroom. I heard them rummaging through my closet. They came out with my shotgun. They also brought out my safe. Ms. Jenkins sat down opposite me. She didn't look malicious. She looked like she genuinely believed she was saving a confused old man from himself. That was the tragedy of it. Greg used her goodness as a weapon against me. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "based on the evidence, the threats, and your agitated state, I am executing an emergency ex parte order signed by a judge this morning. The court has determined that you currently lack the capacity to make safe decisions for yourself or your estate." She handed me a piece of paper. It was heavy. It felt like a tombstone. "Temporary guardianship," it read. "Appointed guardian Gregory Miller." "Greg," I whispered. "You gave him control. He is the one stealing from me." Ms. Jenkins shook her head. "Mr. Miller is very concerned about you. He told us about the money you refused to pay for your daughter's surgery. He told us you think she is at a spa. Mr. Carter, your daughter is in the ICU. We verified it with the hospital admission records. Of course, the records said she was there. Greg paid the admission fee. But physically, she was getting a massage." "You have to listen to me," I pleaded. "Go to the Four Seasons. Just go there. We are not going to a hotel." "Mr. Carter," she said firmly, "we are going to make sure you are safe. Under this order, your financial assets are temporarily frozen to prevent you from being exploited or squandering them due to your condition. Mr. Miller will manage your expenses until a formal hearing next week." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Miller had left it there. I struggled to reach it with my cuffed hands. I managed to pull it out. It was a notification from my bank. "Alert account ending in 4490 has been locked by administrator. Alert credit card ending in 1212 declined at recurring vendor. Alert transfer of $50,000 initiated to Mercy General Hospital." He wasn't waiting. He had the order for 5 minutes and he was already draining me. He was paying the hospital bill, which I knew was just a way to wash the money back to himself. "They are taking my money right now," I yelled, showing her the phone screen. "Look." Ms. Jenkins took the phone from me gently. She didn't look at the screen. She just pressed the power button and set it on the table out of my reach. "It is for the surgery, Mr. Carter. It is to save your daughter. One day, when you are well again, you will thank him." She stood up. "Okay, officer. The scene is secure. We can't leave him here alone with these delusions. The order mandates 24-hour supervision. Are you taking me to jail?" I asked. I felt small. I felt 80 years old. "No," she said. "Mr. Miller has arranged for a private care facility. He said it is very exclusive. He paid for it out of pocket this morning because he loves you. Loves me." The words tasted like bile. They led me out of my house. My neighbors were watching from their porches. Mrs. Higgins, who I had known for 20 years, looked at me with fear. I wasn't Moses the neighbor anymore. I was Moses the crazy old man who had to be taken away by the police. I looked back at my house, my sanctuary. The camera in the library was still recording. But what good was a recording if no one would watch it? What good was the truth if the lie was stamped with a court seal? They put me in the back of the white sedan. There were no door handles on the inside. A child lock. As we drove away, I saw a car pull up to my driveway. It was Greg's BMW. He got out. He was wearing a fresh suit. He waved at the police officer a somber, respectful wave. Then he walked up the steps to my porch. He took out the key, Vanessa's key, and opened my front door. He didn't go inside immediately. He turned and looked at the departing sedan. Even from this distance, I could see it. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just won the lottery. He walked into my house and closed the door. I sat back against the vinyl seat. The handcuffs were gone, but the trap was tighter than ever. I was stripped of my name, my money, and my freedom. I was a non-person. But as we turned onto the highway, heading toward whatever hellhole Greg had picked out for me, I felt a strange sensation in my pocket. Ms. Jenkins had taken my phone, yes, but she hadn't checked my jacket pocket. Inside was the burner phone Saul had given me years ago. "For emergencies," he had said. I had kept it charged hidden in the lining of my coat, a habit from the old days. I didn't touch it. I didn't want them to see. But I pressed my arm against it, feeling the hard plastic shape against my ribs. Greg thought he had cut all my lines of communication. He thought he had silenced me. He was wrong. He had just moved me to a new battlefield, and he forgot one thing about men like me. We don't need a house to fight. We don't need a bank account to fight. All we need is a reason. And he had just given me 150,000 reasons. The sign on the gate said Golden Horizon Assisted Living. It sounded like a resort. The brochure Greg had handed the social worker probably showed smiling seniors playing chess and gardening in the sunlight. But as the unmarked transport van pulled through the rusted iron gates, I saw the truth. The grass was dead. The windows were barred, though they tried to hide the iron bars behind cheap plastic shutters. The building itself was a block of gray concrete that looked less like a home and more like a holding pen for livestock that had outlived their usefulness. They marched me through the front doors. The smell hit me instantly. It was the same smell as the hospital, but stale. It was the scent of industrial cleaner trying to cover up the odor of urine and boiled cabbage. It was the smell of a place where people stopped living and started waiting to die. Greg was waiting in the lobby. He was signing papers at the reception desk, chatting charmingly with a tired-looking nurse. When he saw me, he put on his sad face again. "Daddy," he said, walking over and placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know this is hard, but it is the best place for you. They have specialists here. They can help with your episodes." I shrugged his hand off. My wrists still ached from the handcuffs. "Cut the act, Greg," I said. "There is no audience here. Just the staff you are paying off." Greg leaned in close. His breath smelled of mints and triumph. "You are right, Moses. No audience, which means no one to hear you scream if you make a scene. So be a good boy, go to your room, take your pills, and maybe, just maybe, I will let you have a window seat." He turned to the nurse. Nurse Ratched, or whatever her name was, stepped forward. She was a large woman with eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. "Mr. Miller, we need to process his personal effects," she said. Greg nodded. "Of course." No contraband. He reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone, the one the social worker had turned off. "I will keep this safe for you, Moses," he said, sliding it into his own pocket. "The doctor says screens aggravate your paranoia. We want you to have a digital detox." My heart hammered against my ribs. He thought he had taken my lifeline. He didn't know about the burner phone stitched into the lining of my jacket, pressing against my side like a hidden shield. I kept my face blank. I let him take the dummy phone. I let him think he had won. "Goodbye, Moses," Greg said. "I will visit next month, if I have time." He walked out the automatic doors without looking back. I watched him get into his BMW. I watched him drive away to my house to drink my wine to spend my money. "Come on, mister," Carter the nurse said, grabbing my arm with a grip like a vice. "Let's get you settled." Settled meant stripped. They took my belt. They took my shoelaces. They took my wallet. They cataloged everything in a book, treating my life's possessions like evidence in a crime scene. Then they led me down a long, flickering hallway to room 104. It was a small room with 2 beds separated by a thin, stained curtain. On the other side of the curtain, a man was groaning. It was a low, rhythmic sound of misery. "This is Mr. Henderson," the nurse said. "He doesn't talk much. You will get along fine." She pointed to the empty bed. The sheets were thin and gray. The pillow looked like a bag of rocks. "Dinner is at 5. Lights out at 8. If you leave the room after 8, an alarm sounds. If you try the fire exits, the police are called automatically. Do you understand?" I nodded. I understood perfectly. This wasn't a care facility. It was a minimum security prison for the inconvenient elderly. She left locking the door from the outside. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress springs dug into my thighs. I looked around the room. There was a camera in the corner, a blinking red eye watching my every move. There were no blind spots. I felt a wave of despair so heavy it almost crushed me. I was 73 years old. I had worked hard every day of my life. I had paid my taxes. I had loved my wife. I had raised my daughter. And this was my reward, to be locked in a box by a man who had never done an honest day's work in his life. I closed my eyes and saw Eda May's face. "Run," she had whispered. I hadn't run fast enough. I had tried to fight them with logic, with paperwork, with the rules of a decent society. But Greg and Vanessa didn't play by the rules. They played by the law of the jungle. And in the jungle, the old lion gets eaten by the hyenas. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. There was a water stain shaped like a map of Florida. I traced its outline with my eyes. I could just give up. That is what they wanted. They wanted me to curl up in a ball, stop eating, and let the dementia take over until it became real. It would be so easy. Just drift away. Let the medication they would surely force-feed me turn my brain into mush. But then I thought about my house. I thought about the rose bushes Bernice had planted in the backyard. I thought about the height chart carved into the kitchen doorframe marking Vanessa's growth from a toddler to a woman. If I gave up, Greg would sell that house. He would bulldoze the roses. He would paint over the height chart. He would erase us. No. I sat up. The metal springs squeaked. I was not going to die in this room. I stood up and walked to the door. It had a small reinforced glass window. I looked out into the hallway. I wasn't a prisoner. I was a foreman. And a foreman assesses the job site. I began to watch. For the next 2 days, I didn't speak. I shuffled when I walked. I drooled a little when I ate the tasteless mash they served for lunch. I let them think the shock of the transfer had broken me, but my eyes were sharp. I learned the schedule. The morning shift nurse, a woman named Brenda, was lazy. She did her rounds at 8, but she sat at the station texting until 9:30. The night guard, a heavy-set guy named Miller, no relation to Greg, hopefully fell asleep in his chair around 2 a.m. I watched the medication cart. They didn't watch you swallow the pills. They just handed you the cup and walked away. I learned to tuck the sedatives under my tongue and spit them into the toilet later. I watched the keypad on the end of the hallway door. It was 4 digits. The staff punched it in without covering their hands. 2468. Lazy. Simple. But the most important thing I watched was the people, not the nurses, not the doctors. I watched the invisible people. The ones who cleaned the floors, changed the sheets, and took out the trash. The ones the nurses yelled at and the patients ignored. There was one man, a cleaner. He looked to be in his late 40s with graying hair and a back bent from years of scrubbing. His name tag said Carlos. I watched Carlos work. He was meticulous. He didn't just push the dirt around. He cleaned the corners. He polished the handrails. He took pride in a job that nobody respected. And I saw how they treated him. "Hey, amigos!" "Move it!" a nurse shouted at him when his cart was slightly blocking the hallway. "You are slowing down my rounds." Carlos didn't say anything. He just nodded, mumbled sorry, and moved the cart. But I saw his eyes. I saw the flash of anger quickly hidden behind a mask of subservience. I knew that look. I had seen it on the docks 1,000 times. It was the look of a man who was tired of being invisible. On the 3rd morning, I made my move. I was sitting in the hallway in my wheelchair. I didn't need the wheelchair, but it made me look harmless when Carlos came by to empty the trash can next to me. He was moving fast, trying to stay out of the way. He pulled the bag out, tied it, and reached for a new liner. I looked at his hands. They were rough, calloused, scarred. Working hands. Honest hands. "Your knot is loose," I said softly. Carlos paused. He looked at me, surprised that a patient was speaking to him. Usually the patients just screamed or stared. "Excuse me?" he asked. His accent was thick, rolling the R's. I pointed to the trash bag. "The knot. If you tie it like that, it will slip when you lift it into the dumpster. The weight of the wet trash will break it." I demonstrated with my own hands, miming a specific looping knot. Use a stevedore's knot. Loop it twice, pull the rabbit through the hole. It holds 3 times the weight. Carlos looked at the bag, then at me. He hesitated, then retied the knot the way I showed him. He pulled it tight. It held firm. He looked up, a small smile touching his lips. You worked on the water 40 years, I said. Port of Baltimore, logistics and loading. I know a thing or two about heavy lifting. Carlos nodded respectfully. I was a mechanic. In El Salvador. Before everything. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. I knew the story. A good man, a skilled man forced to start over at the bottom because of borders and papers. They treat you like the furniture here, Carlos, I said, keeping my voice low so the nurse at the station wouldn't hear. Carlos shrugged, scrubbing a stain on the floor with more force than necessary. It is a job. My daughter is in college. I do what I have to do. You are a good father, I said. That struck a chord. His eyes softened. I am a father too, I continued, letting the sadness seep into my voice. But my daughter, she is the one who put me here. She and her husband. They stole my house, Carlos. They stole my life, and they put me here to rot so they could spend my savings on champagne. Carlos stopped scrubbing. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw that I wasn't drooling. He saw that my eyes were clear. That is not right, he whispered. In my culture, we honor the elders. We do not throw them away like garbage. It is not right in any culture, I said. But they think they have won. They think I am helpless. They took my phone. They locked the doors. They think because I am old, I am stupid. I leaned forward in the wheelchair. But they forgot one thing, Carlos. They forgot that men like us, men who built things, men who fixed things, we know how the system works, and we know how to break it. Carlos looked down the hallway to make sure the coast was clear. He leaned in closer to me. What do you need, boss? He asked. I didn't ask for the keys. I didn't ask him to break me out. Not yet. That was too dangerous for him. I need eyes, I said. I need to know when the delivery truck comes. I need to know who signs for the packages. And I need a charger. I tapped the side of my jacket, a subtle gesture indicating the hidden phone. I have a phone. But the battery is dead. If I can charge it, I can call my lawyer. I can call the cavalry. But if they see me with a charger, they will sedate me. Carlos stood up. He adjusted his cart. He didn't say yes immediately. He was weighing the risk. His job, his daughter's tuition against helping an old man he just met. Then he looked at the nurse who was laughing loudly at a video on her phone, ignoring a patient call light that had been blinking for 10 minutes. He looked back at me. Tonight, he said quietly, I clean the rooms during the night shift break. Leave your jacket under the bed. I will take it to the utility closet. It will be charged by morning. Thank you, brother, I said. De nada, hermano, he replied. He pushed his cart away, moving down the hall with the same invisible posture as before. But the dynamic had changed. I wasn't just a patient anymore. I was an ally. I sat back in my wheelchair. I watched the blinking red light of the security camera. Go ahead and watch, I thought. You can watch the hallway, you can watch the doors. But you can't watch the brotherhood of the working class. I had a charger. Tomorrow I would have a phone. And once I had a phone, I would wake up Saul. The prison walls were still there. The smell of bleach was still choking me. But for the first time in 3 days, the air felt a little bit lighter. I was not running anymore. I was digging in. And when I came out of this hole, I was going to bring the whole building down on top of Greg's head. The night shift at Golden Horizon was quieter than a tomb, but somehow less peaceful. Silence in a place like this isn't restful. It is heavy. It is the sound of 50 people holding their breath, waiting for the morning that might not come. I lay on my back, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of Florida. My roommate, Mr. Henderson, was snoring a wet, rattling snore on the other side of the curtain. I had not slept in 4 hours. I was waiting. At 2:15 in the morning, I heard the squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum. It was a specific squeak. The left front wheel of the cleaning cart had a wobble. I had noticed it yesterday. It was the sound of my salvation approaching. The door to my room opened slowly. The hallway light sliced across the floor, illuminating the dust bunnies under my bed. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the brightness. He moved with the practiced invisibility of the working class. He began to mop the floor, the wet slap of the strings against the tile providing a rhythmic cover for what was about to happen. I sat up slowly. The springs of my bed groaned, but the mopping sound didn't stop. "Carlos," I whispered. The mopping continued. He didn't look at me. He worked his way closer to the bed, pushing the gray water around. When he was right next to my nightstand, he dropped a roll of toilet paper. He bent down to pick it up. In one fluid motion, his hand slid under my mattress. I felt the hard rectangular shape of a phone press against the bottom of the bedding. "It is done," he whispered without moving his lips. "It is a burner, prepaid, $20 credit. The charger is taped to the back." I reached out and grabbed his wrist for a second. His skin was rough, warm, and alive. "Thank you, brother," I said. "You don't know what this means." Carlos looked up then. His eyes were tired, rimmed with red, but there was a fire in them. "They took my father's house in Salvador," he said quietly. "Government men with nice suits and bad laws. I could not stop them then. Maybe I help you stop them now." "Hide it well, boss. If they find it, I lose my job, and you lose your mind." He stood up, put the toilet paper on the stand, and pushed his cart out of the room. The door clicked shut. The darkness returned, but the heaviness was gone. I waited 10 minutes to be sure he was clear of the hallway. Then I reached under the mattress. The phone was a cheap Android model, the kind you buy at a gas station counter next to the beef jerky. The screen was small and scratched, but when I pressed the power button, it lit up with a glow that felt like hope. The battery was at 90%. I pulled the blanket over my head to mask the light. It was like being a kid again, reading comic books with a flashlight, except the monster outside wasn't imaginary. It was my son-in-law. My fingers felt clumsy on the small touchscreen. I didn't call the police. That was a rookie mistake. Greg had a court order signed by a judge. If I called the cops, they would run my name, see the temporary guardianship flag, and call Greg. He would be here in 20 minutes with a syringe full of sedative. Number 1. I needed a shark. I needed someone who swam in the same dirty water as Greg but had sharper teeth. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. I prayed he hadn't changed it. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Yeah. The voice was gravel and cigarette smoke. It sounded like a car engine that wouldn't turn over. "Saul," I whispered. "It's Moses. Moses Carter." There was a pause. I could hear the background noise on the other end. A TV playing an infomercial. Ice clinking in a glass. Moses. The Moses from the docks. "I thought you were dead. Or retired. Which is basically the same thing. I am not dead, Saul, but I am in a box. I need your help." I explained everything. I told him about the accident, the fake coma, the lotus flower reflection in the sunglasses, the ambush at my house, the guardianship order, the nursing home. I spoke fast, my breath hot in the stale air under the blanket. I told him about the money Greg was draining as we spoke. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Saul," I asked, panic rising in my throat. "Are you there?" "I am here," Saul grunted. "I am just admiring the balls on this kid. Greg Miller. Right, I know his type. MBA, nice suit, soul the size of a withered peanut. He didn't just rob you, Moses. He dismantled you. This is a textbook extraction. Can you get me out?" I asked. "Can you file a motion, a habeas corpus? Anything." Saul laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Moses, listen to me. The law is a machine. It runs on paper. Right now, Greg has all the paper. He has the doctor's notes saying you have dementia. He has the recordings. He has the social worker's report. If I file a motion tomorrow, the judge will set a hearing for 3 weeks from now. By then, Greg will have liquidated your savings, sold your house, and medicated you until you actually do have dementia." I felt the cold seep into my bones. "So that is it. It is over." "No," Saul said sharply. "The law is a machine, but every machine has a kill switch." "What is the switch?" the girl Saul said. "Vanessa. The whole house of cards is built on her being in a coma. That is the emergency that justified the guardianship. That is the reason he needs your money. If she is healthy, then the medical proxy is fraud. The guardianship is based on perjury. The whole thing collapses." "I told you she is healthy," I hissed. "I saw her walking." "You saw her," Saul corrected. But the judge didn't. The police didn't. In the eyes of the law, unless you have proof, your eyes are lying. You are a 73-year-old man with a diagnosis of cognitive decline. Your word is worth zero. He took a sip of whatever he was drinking. I need a video, Moses. I need a clear, high-definition video of Vanessa Carter walking, talking, or doing anything other than dying. I need a timestamp. I need location data. You get me that, and I can walk into that courtroom and nuke them from orbit. I can have Greg in cuffs before lunch. I gripped the phone tighter. But I am locked in here, Saul. I can't get to her. She is at the Four Seasons. Then you have a problem, Saul said, because I can't go there. I am a disbarred lawyer with a restraining order from the Four Seasons chain-long story, and a private investigator will take 3 days to hire and clear. You don't have 3 days. You might not have 3 hours. What do you mean Greg isn't going to wait, Moses? He knows you are smart. He knows you are dangerous. He put you in that home to break you. If you don't break fast enough, he will escalate. He will authorize a surgery for you, or a change in medication. He will turn you into a vegetable to protect his investment. The fear I felt before was nothing compared to this. This was clarity. So I have to get out, I said. It wasn't a question. Saul didn't answer immediately. I didn't say that, he finally said. As an officer of the court or a former one, I cannot advise you to escape a court-ordered facility. That would be a felony. He paused. But if you were to go for a walk, and if you happen to end up at the Four Seasons, and if you happen to film your daughter dancing the cha-cha, well, that would just be a miracle, wouldn't it? I closed my eyes. I was 73. My knees were bad. My back hurt when it rained. I had no money, no car, and no weapons. I will get you the video, Saul. Good man, Saul said. Call me when you have it. And Moses, don't get caught. If they catch you trying to escape, they will send you to the State Ward Psych Unit, and nobody comes back from there. The line went dead. I pushed the blanket off my face. The room was still dark. Mr. Henderson was still snoring. But everything had changed. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an operative. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was my weapon. But to use it, I had to get close to the target. I had to get out of a locked facility, navigate across the city without money, and infiltrate a 5-star hotel to catch a ghost. I looked over at Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I whispered, I hope you are a heavy sleeper. I slid out of bed. My bare feet hit the cold floor. I walked to the window and peered through the slats of the plastic shutters. Outside the fence was 10 feet high. But there was a tree, an old oak tree near the service entrance. Its branches hung low over the fence line. I used to climb trees when I was 10. Could I do it at 73? I didn't have a choice. I hid the phone in my sock. I put on my shoes, thanking God they hadn't taken those yet, although they had taken the laces. I would have to shuffle. I walked to the door and listened. The hallway was silent. Brenda, the night nurse, would be on her break. She usually went out to the parking lot to smoke for 15 minutes at 3 a.m. I checked the cheap plastic clock on the wall. 2:55. 5 minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed and tied my shoes as tight as I could without laces tucking the flaps in. I stretched my arms. My joints popped. I thought about Vanessa, my little girl. I thought about the time she fell off her bike and scraped her knee, and I carried her all the way home. I would have died for her. I would have killed for her. And now I had to destroy her to save myself. It is a strange thing what betrayal does to love. It doesn't kill it. It curdles it. It turns it into fuel. I wasn't doing this because I hated her. I was doing this because the Vanessa I loved was already dead. The thing in the Four Seasons was just a thief wearing her face. 2:59. I heard the heavy clunk of the side exit door opening down the hall. Brenda going out for her smoke. It was time. I stood up. I wasn't Moses the patient. I wasn't Moses the victim. I was Moses Carter, Union Foreman, Local 33, and I had one last shift to work. I opened the door and stepped into the shadows. 3 a.m. is the hour of the wolf. It is the time when the spirit is weakest and the shadows are longest. I sat on the edge of my bed, my shoes tied tight with the makeshift knots I had fashioned from strips of my bedsheet. I could hear Mr. Henderson snoring a rhythmic, rattling sound that had become the soundtrack to my imprisonment. I looked at the call button on the wall. It was a small red plastic circle. To most people, it was a request for help. To me, it was the trigger of a weapon. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the facility. I had to time this perfectly. Brenda, the night nurse, was at the station. I could hear the faint sound of a television show she was watching on her tablet. She was distracted, tired, and lazy. That was my advantage. I pressed the button. Once, twice, 3 times, then I let out a scream. It wasn't just a shout, it was a guttural, terrifying noise that I pulled from the deepest part of my gut. It was the sound of a man dying. I had seen men die on the docks. I knew the sound. I grabbed my chest with my left hand and threw myself off the bed, crashing onto the linoleum floor with a heavy thud that shook the room. Mr. Henderson woke up with a snort. "What? Who is there?" he mumbled, confused and blind without his glasses. "Help me!" I gasped, pitching my voice to carry down the hall. "My heart. Oh God, my heart." I heard the chair scrape against the floor at the nurse's station. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Heavy, panicked footsteps. The door burst open. Brenda stood there, her eyes wide. She saw me writhing on the floor, clutching my chest, gasping for air like a fish on a deck. "Mr. Carter." She froze. Panic does that to untrained people. It makes them hesitate. "Call 911. I wheezed, putting every ounce of acting skill I had into the performance. "My arm, it is numb. I can't breathe." She didn't check my pulse. She didn't check my airways. She saw a liability. She saw a lawsuit. She spun around and ran back to the desk, fumbling for the phone. I heard her voice, high and shrill, shouting for an ambulance. "Code Blue Room 104. This was it, the eye of the hurricane. I heard the squeak of the wheel. Carlos appeared in the doorway. He wasn't running, but he was moving with urgent purpose. He had the large canvas laundry cart with him, the one filled with the soiled sheets from the second floor. "Vomit," Carlos yelled toward the nurse's station covering for me. "He is vomiting everywhere I need to clean." Brenda didn't even look back. "Just clean it," she screamed into the phone. Carlos rolled the cart right next to me. He looked down. There was no pity in his eyes, only a fierce determination. "Vámonos, boss," he whispered. I didn't hesitate. I ignored the screaming pain in my bad knee and scrambled up. I dove headfirst into the cart. It smelled of urine, sweat, and bleach. It was the smell of human misery. I buried myself under a pile of heavy, damp sheets. Carlos threw a thick wool blanket over me, completely concealing my body. "Stay flat," he hissed. "Do not breathe." I felt the cart lurch forward. The vibrations rattled my teeth. I curled into a fetal position, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might actually give myself the heart attack I was faking. I heard Brenda's voice as we passed the station. "They are 5 minutes out. Is he breathing?" Carlos didn't stop. "I am taking the dirty linens to the dock before the medics come. The smell is bad." "Wait," Brenda shouted. My blood froze. The cart stopped. "You can't go out there now. We have an emergency." He vomited on the sheets, Carlos said, his voice calm and steady. "Infection protocol. I have to isolate the biohazard. Do you want the paramedics to slip on it?" There was a pause, a second that stretched into an hour. "Fine, go. Just stay out of the way." The cart moved again, faster this time. I heard the beep of the electronic lock on the rear service door, then the rush of air. It wasn't the sterile, recycled air of the nursing home. It was cold, wet, and smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. Freedom. We hit the loading dock ramp. The wheels clattered loudly on the metal grating. Carlos pushed the cart behind a large dumpster out of sight of the security cameras. "Get out," he whispered. "Fast." I threw off the heavy sheets and scrambled out of the cart. The rain was falling hard instantly, soaking my thin cotton shirt. I shivered, the cold biting into my skin. Carlos reached into his pocket and pulled out a knit cap. He shoved it into my hand. "Cover your face. Go through the woods. Do not take the road. The police will be here in 2 minutes." I looked at him. This man who had nothing had risked his job and his freedom for me. "I will come back for you, Carlos," I promised. "When this is over, I won't forget this." "Go," he urged, pushing me toward the dark tree line. I ran. I ran with a limp, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I ran. I made it into the cover of the trees just as the sirens began to wail in the distance. Blue and red lights swept across the wet grass, illuminating the spot where I had stood seconds before. I crouched behind a thick oak tree, watching as the ambulance pulled into the driveway. They would run into my room. They would find an empty bed. They would find an open window. They would think I wandered off in a delirium. The hunt was on. I turned and headed deeper into the woods. I knew this area. I had driven past it 1,000 times. But driving past it and navigating it on foot at 3 in the morning were two different things. The ground was slick with mud. Thorny vines tore at my pants. I fell twice, scraping my palms raw on the rocks, but I didn't stop. I couldn't feel the pain. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. I emerged from the woods into a residential neighborhood about 2 miles away. I stuck to the shadows, avoiding the street lights. I looked like a homeless man, a crazy old drifter, in a way that was exactly what I had become. I patted my pocket. The burner phone was still there, dry inside the Ziploc bag Carlos had put it in. I needed to get to my house. It was 5 miles away, a 5-mile walk in the rain for a 73-year-old man with no jacket. I started walking. I kept my head down. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the main avenue. I ducked behind a parked minivan, holding my breath. The cruiser paused its spotlight, sweeping the sidewalk, then moved on. They were looking for a confused dementia patient. They were looking for someone who would be wandering in circles, crying for help. They weren't looking for a man moving with military precision toward a target. My legs began to cramp around mile 3. The cold had settled deep into my joints. I was shivering violently. I needed warmth. I needed rest. But the image of Greg's smile kept pushing me forward. I reached my neighborhood just before dawn. The sky was turning a bruised purple color. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I approached my house from the back alley. I knew every loose fence board, every creaky gate in this neighborhood. I crept through Mrs. Higgins' garden, praying her beagle wouldn't bark. The dog was asleep. I reached my own backyard. I crouched behind the shed where I kept my lawnmower. I looked at my house. Every light was on. It was blazing like a Christmas tree. I saw shadows moving in the kitchen. I saw silhouettes. I crept closer, moving to the window of the dining room. I peered through the crack in the curtains. Greg was there. He was sitting at my dining table, but he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men. They were wearing suits, but they looked cheap. They had laptops open. Papers were scattered everywhere, my papers. My life. They were drinking my bourbon. Greg was laughing. He held up a glass, toasting the men. I saw his lips move. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the body language. It was the language of victory. Then Vanessa walked into the room. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't in a hospital gown. She wasn't in a cast. She was wearing a silk robe. She was walking perfectly fine. She walked over to Greg and kissed him on the cheek. She picked up a stack of documents and tossed them into a cardboard box labeled trash. I recognized the documents. It was my photo albums, the pictures of her childhood, the pictures of Bernice. She was throwing us away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the window and strangle them both with my bare hands. The rage was so hot it almost melted the cold rain on my skin, but I stopped myself. If I went in there now, they would win. They would call the police. They would say I broke out of the facility and attacked them in a psychotic rage. I would be shot or locked up forever in a maximum security ward. No. I needed the video. I needed the kill shot. I looked at the scene one last time. Let them laugh. Let them drink. Let them think the old man is lost in the woods, freezing to death. I pulled out the burner phone. I took a picture of the window. It was grainy dark and probably inadmissible in court because of the distance. But I took it for myself, to remember. I turned away from the house that was no longer mine. I couldn't stay here. They would search the grounds eventually. I had to go to the one place they would never look for me. I had to go to the city. To the Four Seasons. I was shivering uncontrollably now. Hypothermia was setting in. I needed shelter. I needed dry clothes. And I needed a disguise. I limped away from my home back into the alley. I was a ghost now, a ghost with a mission. I walked toward the bus station. I didn't have money for a ticket, but I knew the schedule. The early morning commuter bus to downtown was always crowded. The driver, an old guy named Pete, never checked the passes of the seniors closely during rush hour. I was going to ride into the belly of the beast. As I walked, I whispered the names of my enemies. Greg, Vanessa, Apex. I am coming. I rasped into the wind, and the wind howled back, pushing me forward. The sun began to break over the horizon, illuminating a world that had tried to discard me. But as I stepped onto the pavement, I felt something harder than the concrete beneath my feet. I felt my own will. I wasn't just surviving. I was hunting, and the hunt was just beginning. I didn't take the bus to the city. Not yet. As I stood at the bus stop, shivering in the dawn light, the realization hit me like a physical blow. Going to the Four Seasons now would be a mistake. I was a fugitive in dirty clothes with no money and no proof. If I walked into that hotel, security would tackle me before I got within 10 feet of Vanessa. I needed ammunition. I needed something harder than my word, and I knew exactly where to find it. I turned back toward the house. My house. The front door was locked and Greg had the keys. The back door was deadbolted. But there was a way in that only I knew about. When I bought this place 30 years ago, there was an old coal chute behind the hydrangeas that led to the basement. I had converted it into a ventilation shaft for a small wine cellar I built for Bernice. I had welded the grate shut years ago, but the weld on the left hinge was weak. I knew it was weak because I had meant to fix it for a decade and never got around to it. Now that procrastination was my lifeline. I crawled through the wet mulch, dragging my bad leg behind me. I found the grate hidden under the overgrown bushes. I jammed a rock into the hinge and pried. It groaned, a sound of metal on metal that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning. I froze, waiting for sirens, waiting for Greg to come running out with my shotgun, but nothing happened. The house remained silent. I squeezed through the opening, dropping 5 feet onto a pile of old drop cloths. The air down here was cool and smelled of damp earth and cork. I lay there for a moment in the dark, listening. Above me, the floorboards creaked. Footsteps, heavy ones, Greg, and lighter, quicker ones. Vanessa. I pulled myself up. The wooden stairs leading from the cellar to the kitchen were steep. I took them one at a time, testing each step for squeaks. I knew this house better than I knew the back of my own hand. I knew the third step groaned. I skipped it. I knew the door at the top had a tendency to stick if you didn't lift the handle slightly. I reached the top of the stairs. The door was cracked open an inch. A sliver of light cut across the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I put my eye to the crack. The kitchen was bright. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted down, making my empty stomach cramp violently. Greg was sitting at the island wearing his silk robe. He was scrolling on his phone, looking relaxed, like a king surveying his new kingdom. And then she walked in. Vanessa, my little girl. The woman who was supposed to be in a medically induced coma, fighting for her life against catastrophic brain swelling. She was wearing yoga pants and a tight tank top. She was holding a glass of orange juice in one hand and a piece of toast in the other. She wasn't limping. She wasn't using a cane. She was dancing. She did a little pirouette as she moved to the fridge, her movements fluid and graceful. She looked radiant, healthy, alive. More mimosa, she asked, her voice light and teasing. Greg looked up and grinned. Why not? We are celebrating. The transfer went through. The bank just confirmed the first 50,000 cleared. Vanessa laughed. It was a beautiful sound that used to make my heart swell. Now it made my blood run cold. Did you see his face when the police took him? She asked, pouring champagne into her juice. He looked so pathetic, like a lost puppy. Greg chuckled. He is safe now, locked away where he can't hurt himself. Or our bank account. Vanessa took a sip of her drink and hopped up onto the counter, swinging her legs. Legs that were supposed to be broken. I still feel a little bad, she said, though her tone suggested she felt nothing of the sort. He is my dad after all. He is not your dad anymore, Nessie, Greg said smoothly. He is a liability. You saw the way he was hoarding that money. He was going to die and leave it to some charity or let the state take it. We are just accelerating the inheritance. We are putting it to good use. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with that logic. You are right. Besides, the spa treatment is helping with the stress. I am thinking of extending the booking another week. Do you think we can afford it? Greg raised his glass. With the line of credit I just opened on the house. Baby, we can buy the spa. I lowered my head, closing my eyes against the stinging tears. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a funeral. I was mourning the death of the person I thought she was. The Vanessa I raised would have given her last dollar to a stranger. This creature in my kitchen was a parasite. I couldn't go in there. If I burst through that door, I would kill him. I knew it with absolute certainty. I would grab the cast iron skillet from the stove and I wouldn't stop swinging until they were both silent. And then I would go to prison and they would be the victims. The narrative would be perfect. Crazed father escapes institution and murders family. Number 1. I needed to be smarter. I needed the kill switch. I backed down 2 steps silently. I needed their devices. I needed the digital trail. I knew where they slept. The master bedroom. My bedroom. They had taken it over. I went back down to the basement and moved to the other side of the house where the laundry chute was. It was too small for me to climb up, but it carried sound perfectly. I listened. They were still in the kitchen laughing about buying a new Tesla. I had maybe 5 minutes before they went upstairs to get dressed. I went back up the cellar stairs, slipped through the kitchen door while their backs were turned, and ducked into the hallway. I moved like a shadow, pressing my back against the wall. I ghosted past the living room and slipped into the master bedroom. The room smelled of them. Greg's expensive cologne, Vanessa's floral perfume. It made me gag. The bed I had shared with Bernice for 30 years, was unmade a tangle of sheets. I scanned the room. On the nightstand next to a half-empty bottle of wine sat an iPad. It was Vanessa's. It was the white Pro model I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago so she could draw. I crept over to it. I pressed the home button. Passcode required. My heart stopped, of course. I stared at the keypad. 6 digits. I tried her birthday, 061288. Incorrect. I tried her wedding anniversary, 101419. Incorrect. I tried the last 4 digits of her social. Incorrect. iPad is disabled for 1 minute. I cursed silently. My hands were sweating. I could hear them moving around in the kitchen. The water was running. They were washing dishes. Think Moses. Think. What does she care about? What number would she never forget? Not me, not Bernice. I looked around the room. On the dresser there was a framed photo of her dog Buster, the golden retriever she had growing up. He died the year she graduated high school. She loved that dog more than anything. Buster died on July 4th, 0704. I waited for the minute to tick down. It felt like a lifetime. The seconds dragged on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I typed in 070400. Buster's birthday. No. I typed in the date he died. 070406. The screen unlocked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was in. I didn't look at her photos. I didn't look at her messages. I went straight to the folder labeled Health. I opened the Health app. The dashboard loaded. It was syncing. The little wheel spun at the top of the screen. Syncing with Vanessa's Apple Watch. She was wearing the watch right now. I had seen it on her wrist in the kitchen. The data populated. I stared at the screen, and for the first time that morning I smiled. A cold, hard smile. Today's activity steps 1-240. From dancing in the kitchen, active energy, 150 calories. Yesterday's activity steps, 8,432. Flights climbed 12. Heart rate analysis, peak 140 beats per minute cardio. I scrolled back. The day of the accident, steps 10,200. Walking asymmetry 0%. Double support time. Normal. A person with a broken leg does not walk 10,000 steps. A person in a coma does not climb 12 flights of stairs. A person with brain swelling does not have a perfect rhythmic resting heart rate of 62. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a video of her walking that could be claimed as a miraculous recovery. This was biometric data, hard numbers, proof that on the days she was billing my insurance for a coma, she was doing Zumba. I pulled out my burner phone. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I took a photo of the screen, then another. I switched to video mode and scrolled through the weeks, narrating in a whisper. Date October 14th. Patient Vanessa Carter alleged to be in ICU, step count 9,000, heart rate variability consistent with moderate exercise. I recorded it all. The syncing icon proved it was live data from the watch she was currently wearing. I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Babe, have you seen my phone?" Greg's voice, getting closer. "I think you left it in the bedroom," Vanessa called out. Panic surged. I was trapped. The window was too high for my bad leg. The closet. No, if he came in for the phone, he might change his clothes. I looked at the iPad. I needed to send this. Photos on a burner phone could be lost or destroyed. I opened her email app. I typed in Saul's email address. I attached the screenshots and the exported health data file. Subject, the dead walk. I hit send. The whoosh sound of the email sending seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet room. I quickly deleted the sent email from her outbox and the trash folder. I wiped the screen with my sleeve to remove fingerprints. The doorknob turned. I dove. I rolled under the bed. It was a tight squeeze. The dust bunnies I hadn't cleaned in months were thick down here. I pressed my face into the carpet, holding my breath. Greg walked in. I saw his expensive Italian loafers. They stopped right next to my face. He walked to the nightstand. I heard him pick up the phone. "Yeah, it's here," he yelled. He paused. "That's weird," he muttered. My heart hammered against the floorboards. Had I left the iPad on? Had I moved it? "Vanessa," he called out. "Did you unlock the iPad?" "No," she shouted from the hallway. "Why? It's sitting here on the home screen. I thought you locked it." "I probably forgot." "Who cares? Let's go. We have a massage at 10. Greg stood there for another second. I could feel his suspicion radiating off him. He was a predator. He sensed when another predator had been in his territory. But the promise of the spa and the money was too strong. "Whatever," he said. He walked out. I lay under the bed for 10 minutes after I heard the front door close and the BMW engine fade away. I crawled out covered in dust. I stood up in the room that used to be my sanctuary. I looked at the unmade bed. I took the iPad. I wasn't leaving it. It was evidence. I slipped it under my shirt, tucking it into my waistband. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and out the back door. The sun was fully up now. The rain had stopped. I had the gun. Now I just needed to pull the trigger. I pulled out the burner phone and dialed Saul. "I have it," I said. "Check your email. And get the judge ready. I am coming in." I huddled in the back of a crosstown bus, my head lowered, the burner phone pressed tight against my ear. The city was waking up around me. People were rushing to jobs they hated, drinking coffee from paper cups, completely unaware that a war was being fought right under their noses. I had sent the email to Saul. I had the digital smoking gun tucked into the waistband of my trousers, the iPad screen cold against my skin. But Saul was a lawyer. He lived in a world of technicalities. He had warned me that digital evidence could be challenged. They could claim the timestamp was wrong. They could claim the account was hacked. They could claim it was a deepfake. We needed a witness, a human being who could point a finger and say, "I heard the devil speak." Saul picked up on the first ring. "I got the files, Moses," he said, his voice buzzing with a mix of excitement and caffeine. "This is gold. Absolute gold. I see the step count. I see the heart rate. But we are not crossing the finish line yet." "Where is she, Saul?" I cut him off. "Where did they take Eda May?" There was the sound of typing on the other end. It wasn't easy to find Moses. Apex Senior Services covers their tracks well. They use a network of shell companies to move patients around like inventory. But I found a billing discrepancy. A transfer for a Jane Doe to a state-funded hospice facility in West Baltimore called The Last Stop. The official name is Oakwood Care Center. But on the street they call it The Waiting Room, West Baltimore. That was the other side of the tracks, the part of the city the tourists never saw. "Is she alive?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. "She was checked in at 4 a.m. yesterday," Saul said. "Indigent status. No next of kin listed. Moses, if you are going there, be careful. Places like Oakwood don't like visitors asking questions." "I am not asking questions, Saul. I am going to get my witness." I hung up. I checked my pockets. I had $4 in loose change I had scrounged from the pockets of my jacket before I left the nursing home. It wasn't enough for a cab. It was barely enough for a sandwich. But I had my bus pass. They hadn't taken that because they didn't think it had value. It took me 2 hours to get to West Baltimore. The scenery changed from the glass towers of the harbor to boarded-up row houses and liquor stores behind bulletproof glass. Oakwood Care Center was a brick building that looked like a converted prison. The windows were small and high up. The grass out front was dead. There was no security guard at the gate because there was nothing inside worth stealing. I walked through the front doors. The smell was different here. It wasn't bleach. It was mildew and despair. The receptionist was behind a thick plexiglass shield arguing on her cell phone. She didn't even look up as I shuffled past her. I was just another old black man in a worn coat. In places like this, I was invisible. I walked down the hallway reading the room numbers written on pieces of masking tape stuck to the doors. I found room 12. The door was open. Inside there were 4 beds crammed into a space meant for 2. It was hot, stiflingly hot. I saw her in the corner bed. Eda May looked smaller than I remembered. Without her wig, her gray hair was thin and wispy. She was curled up in a ball facing the wall, clutching a thin, ragged blanket. I walked over to her. My shoes squeaked on the dirty linoleum. "Eda," I whispered. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. "It is Moses," I said softly. The man from the hospital. The man you saved. Slowly, painfully, she rolled over. Her milky blind eyes searched the air. Her face was gaunt. They hadn't fed her. Or maybe she refused to eat. You shouldn't be here, she rasped. Her voice was weak, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. They will hurt you. They already tried, I said, pulling a metal folding chair next to her bed. They took my house, Eda. They took my money. They locked me up too. But I got out. And I came for you. She reached out a trembling hand. I took it. Her skin was paper-thin and cold. Why, she asked. Why come for an old blind woman? Because you heard them, I said. You heard the truth. And I need you to tell the judge what you heard. I need you to tell him about the onion juice and the laughter. Eda shook her head violently. No, no judges, no police. I just want to die in peace, Moses. I am tired. You can't die yet, I said, firmly squeezing her hand. Not while they are out there drinking champagne. Not while that man is free, the man, she whispered. A look of genuine terror crossed her face. Greg, I said. My son-in-law. No, she said sharply. Not Greg. That is not his name. I froze. What do you mean? Eda pulled me closer. Her grip was surprisingly strong again, fueled by fear. I know his voice, Moses. I told you I was a nurse, but I didn't tell you where I finished my career. I was a private duty nurse for a wealthy family in Virginia. The Mills family. I listened, my heart pounding against my ribs. I took care of Mrs. Eleanor Mills, she continued. She was a widow, rich, lonely. She had a son, a charming boy. He wore nice suits. He brought her flowers every Sunday. He called her Mama in that sweet, sugary voice. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. His name was Gary, Eda whispered. Gary Mills. But the voice, it is the same voice. I never forget a voice. When you lose your eyes, your ears become your memory. I heard him in the hospital room next to yours. I heard the cadence. I heard the way he hums when he is thinking. It is him. And what happened to Mrs. Mills, I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. He drained her. Eda said, a tear leaking from her unseeing eye. He got power of attorney because he said she was forgetting things. She wasn't forgetting things, Moses. He was changing her pills. He was giving her sedatives instead of heart medication. I tried to tell the doctor, but Gary fired me. He accused me of stealing silver. He ruined my reputation. 2 months later, Mrs. Mills died of a massive stroke, and Gary sold the estate and vanished. I sat back the metal chair, groaning under my weight. It wasn't just a scam. It was a lifestyle. Greg, or Gary, or whatever he called himself, was a predator who specialized in the elderly. He found vulnerable families, embedded himself, and consumed them from the inside out. Vanessa wasn't just his wife. She was his latest tool. Or maybe she was his next victim once he was done with me. He is a monster, Eda said. He eats the old, he eats the weak. That is why we have to stop him, I said. Not just for me, for Mrs. Mills, for you, for every person he has destroyed. I don't have the strength. Moses, she wept. I am nobody. I am blind. Who will believe me? I will believe you, I said fiercely. Saul will believe you. And when we walk into that courtroom, you won't be alone. I will be your eyes, Eda. I will lead you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had left of my former life, a small silver military coin I carried for luck. I pressed it into her palm. You were a nurse in the army, right? I asked. She nodded, her fingers tracing the ridges of the coin. Vietnam. 68. Then you are a soldier, I said, and soldiers don't leave the enemy standing on the battlefield. She was silent for a long time. The sounds of the facility, coughing, groaning, the rattle of carts filled the air. I watched her face. I saw the fear battling with something else. Something harder. Pride. She took a deep breath. It rattled in her chest. He accused me of stealing silver, she murmured. I never stole a penny in my life. He took your honor, Eda. Let's go get it back. She sat up. It was a slow, painful movement, but she did it. She swung her thin legs over the side of the bed. Do you have a car? She asked. I have a bus pass and a lawyer waiting on the other side of town, I said. She gripped the coin tightly in her fist. Get me my shoes, Moses. I found her shoes under the bed. They were worn slip-ons. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees, and slid them onto her feet. I felt like a knight arming a queen. We walked out of the room together. The nurse at the station looked up, annoyed. "Hey, you can't take her? She is a ward of the state." I turned to look at the receptionist. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my eyes blazing with a fire that had been building for 3 days. "She is not a ward," I said, my voice booming off the cinder block walls. "She is a witness. And if you try to stop us, I will have the entire Baltimore press corps here in 20 minutes to film the conditions of this rat hole. Do you want to be on the 6 o'clock news?" The receptionist froze. She looked at Eda, then at me. She saw the trouble. She saw the paperwork. She saw the scandal. She sat back down and picked up her magazine. "I didn't see you," she muttered. "Just go." We walked out into the gray light of West Baltimore. The wind was picking up. Eda May held onto my arm with a grip that could crush steel. "Where are we going?" she asked as we stood on the curb. "We are going to court, Eda," I said, flagging down a taxi that was miraculously passing by. I didn't have money to pay for it, but I would worry about that when we got there. Saul could pay the fare. We got into the cab. "Courthouse," I told the driver. "And step on it." As the car pulled away, Eda leaned her head back against the seat. "Moses?" "Yes, Eda." "Does he still wear that cologne? The one that smells like burnt wood and money?" "Yes," I said. "He does." "Good," she said, a small, grim smile appearing on her face. "I can't wait to smell the fear on him when I walk in." I looked at the burner phone, 1 bar of battery left. I sent a text to Saul. "Package secured. The ghost is coming to dinner." The final showdown was set. Greg had the money. He had the law. He had the power. But I had a blind woman who could see his soul, and I had the truth. We were coming for him, and hell was coming with us. While I was speeding across the city in a taxi that smelled of stale tobacco, holding the hand of a trembling blind woman, a different kind of drama was playing out in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of courtroom 4B. I was not there to see it, but I read the transcripts later. I studied every word, every pause, every lie. I know exactly how it went down. It was a masterclass in deception, a play written by a predator and performed for an audience of one. The Honorable Judge Harrison sat on the bench. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a face etched with the impatience of someone who had heard every excuse in the book. He looked at the clock on the wall more than he looked at the people in front of him. To him, this was just another Tuesday, another case of an elderly person losing their grip on reality, another sad family tragedy that needed to be filed, stamped, and forgotten before lunch. Greg stood at the plaintiff's table. He looked immaculate. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that was tailored to perfection, the kind of suit that whispers authority and responsibility. He wore a black tie, a subtle nod to the tragedy unfolding in his family. His hair was combed back, his face was clean-shaven, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Not from crying, I knew, but likely from rubbing them with a little bit of menthol right before he walked through the double doors. Next to him sat his lawyer, a man named Sterling, who looked like a shark in a pinstripe suit. Sterling had a reputation. He didn't defend the innocent. He legitimized the guilty. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice smooth as oil. "We are here today on an emergency basis because time is of the essence. We are asking the court to grant permanent plenary guardianship of Mr. Moses Carter to his son-in-law, Mr. Gregory Miller. We are also asking for an immediate freezing of all assets and the power to liquidate real estate to fund urgent medical care." Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at the empty defense table. The chair where I should have been sitting was vacant. It looked like an admission of guilt. "Is the respondent not present?" the judge asked, his eyebrows narrowing. Greg stood up slowly. He gripped the edge of the table as if he needed it for support. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "No, Your Honor." Greg said, his voice cracking just enough to sound brave. "My father-in-law, Moses, is not here." "Where is he, Mr. Miller?" He escaped, Your Honor." Greg paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Escaped." It was a word you used for convicts and wild animals. "He was placed in a secure memory care facility 2 days ago for his own safety," Greg continued. "He was confused, violent. He was convinced that there was a conspiracy against him. Last night he assaulted a staff member, set off a fire alarm, and fled into the woods. The police are searching for him now. We are terrified that he might hurt himself or someone else." The judge shook his head, a look of pity forming on his face. Not for me. For Greg. I am sorry to hear that, Mr. Miller, the judge said. It is always tragic when they reach this stage. Sterling stepped forward, handing a thick binder to the bailiff. Your Honor, we have submitted into evidence the medical reports from 3 independent specialists. Exhibit A is a cognitive assessment indicating advanced vascular dementia with paranoid delusions. Exhibit B is a police report from the incident at Mr. Carter's home where he was found with a loaded shotgun threatening to kill his family because he believed they were imposters. The judge flipped through the binder. He didn't look closely at the signatures. If he had, he might have noticed that Dr. Roberts and Dr. Lee shared the same office address as a shell company Greg owned, but judges are busy men. They trust the paperwork. And the financial urgency, the judge asked, looking up. Greg stepped forward again. This was his big moment, the moment he had rehearsed in the mirror while my daughter laughed in the background. Your Honor, Greg said, wiping a tear from his cheek. My wife, Moses's only daughter, is currently on life support at Mercy General. She needs a craniotomy. It is a life-saving surgery, but the insurance has denied coverage. He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Moses has the money. He has a house that is fully paid off. He has a pension. But in his delusional state, he believes Vanessa is faking it. He believes she is already dead. He refused to sign the release for the funds. He looked me in the eye while his daughter was dying and told me he would rather burn the money than save her. A murmur went through the courtroom. The court reporter stopped typing for a second. The bailiff looked disgusted. To them, I was a monster, a father who would let his child die out of spite and madness. Judge Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Greg with sympathy. He saw a young white professional trying to do the right thing. He saw a man who was dealing with a dying wife and a crazy, dangerous father-in-law. Mr. Miller, the judge said softly, I can only imagine the burden you are carrying. It is hard, Your Honor, Greg whispered. I love Moses. He was like a father to me for years. But the man I knew is gone. The man running around the streets right now. That is not Moses. That is a shell. And I just want to protect what is left of his dignity. And I want to save my wife. Sterling moved in for the kill. Your Honor, without this order, we cannot access the funds to pay the surgeon. Every hour we wait is an hour Vanessa Carter loses. We are asking you to let Mr. Miller take the wheel before the car goes off the cliff. The judge nodded. He closed the binder. He reached for his gavel. It was a simple calculation for him. On one side, a missing, armed, erratic old man who hadn't even bothered to show up. On the other side, a polished, weeping son-in-law with a stack of medical degrees and a dying wife. The narrative was perfect. The trap was shut. I have seen enough, Judge Harrison said. The court finds by clear and convincing evidence that Moses Carter is incapacitated and unable to manage his person or his estate. The court also finds that an emergency exists regarding the medical care of Vanessa Carter. He picked up his pen. I am granting the petition for permanent guardianship. Mr. Miller, you are hereby appointed as the fiduciary. You have full authority to liquidate assets, sell real estate, and make medical decisions for Mr. Carter, and I am issuing a bench warrant for Mr. Carter's detainment. When the police find him, he is to be remanded to the state psychiatric ward for evaluation. Greg bowed his head. Thank you, Your Honor. You have saved our family. The judge began to sign the order. The ink flowed onto the paper. That signature was the end of my life. It was the legal death of Moses Carter. With that stroke of the pen, I became a non-person. I became property. Greg watched the pen move. I can imagine the smile fighting to break through his mask of grief. He was thinking about the house. He was thinking about the bank accounts. He was thinking about how easy it had been. The judge finished signing. He handed the papers to the clerk. Next case, the judge called out, looking at his watch. Greg turned to his lawyer and shook his hand. They began to pack up their briefcases. They had won. It was over. But the door to the courtroom is heavy. It is made of solid oak, and when it opens, it makes a sound like a thunderclap. Just as Greg turned to leave, just as he was about to walk out into the hallway, as the new owner of my life, the double doors at the back of the room flew open. They didn't just open. They banged against the walls with a violence that made the bailiff jump. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Every head turned. The judge looked up, annoyed at the disruption. Greg froze his hand halfway to his pocket where he kept his car keys. I stood in the doorway. I was wet. I was dirty. My clothes were covered in mud from the woods and grease from the laundry cart. I looked like a wild man. I looked exactly like the lunatic Greg had described. But I wasn't alone. Next to me, holding my arm, was a small, frail woman in a hospital gown and oversized slippers. She was blind, but she held her head high. And behind us, flanked by 2 junior associates carrying boxes of files, was Saul Goodman. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was crooked, but he was grinning like a wolf who had just found the door to the henhouse open. Greg's face went pale. It wasn't the pallor of grief this time. It was the color of a man who sees a ghost. "Mr. Carter," the judge asked, squinting at me. I stepped forward. My bad knee screamed, but I didn't limp. I marched. "I am here, Your Honor," I said, my voice rough but steady, filling the room. "And I object." "Objection," Greg's lawyer sputtered. "The hearing is concluded. The order is signed." "Not until the ink is dry," Saul announced, strutting past me toward the bench. "And, Your Honor, before you let that man walk out of here with my client's life in his pocket, I think you might want to watch a little movie we just produced." Greg took a step back. He looked at the exit. He looked at me. "Sit down, Greg," I said. "We have a lot to talk about." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tide turning. The judge put his pen down. He looked at Greg, then at me, then at the blind woman standing by my side. "Bailiff," the judge said, his voice cold, "seal the doors. Nobody leaves." I looked at Greg. I saw the panic start to rise in his eyes. He knew. In that split second, he knew that the game had changed. The pawn had crossed the board, and the king was about to fall. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B didn't just open. They exploded inward, slamming against the side walls with a sound like a cannon shot that echoed off the high coffered ceiling. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off before the screaming starts. Every head in the room snapped around. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff's hand dropped instinctively to the butt of his weapon. I stood in the doorway. I was not the man Greg had described to the judge minutes earlier. I was not frail. I was not confused. And I was definitely not cowering. Yes, my trench coat was stained with the mud of the woods and the grease of a laundry cart. Yes, my shoes were scuffed and my face was unshaven. But I stood with the posture of a man who had spent 40 years commanding a shipping dock. My back was straight, my chin was up, and my eyes were locked on one target. Gregory Miller. But I wasn't alone. To my right stood Saul Goodman. He looked like a disheveled bulldog in a cheap suit carrying a battered briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He was sweating, panting slightly from the run up the courthouse steps, but his eyes were gleaming with the thrill of the fight. To my left stood Carlos, my friend, the cleaner who had risked his livelihood for a stranger. He was still wearing his gray janitorial uniform from the nursing home, a badge of honor in this room of expensive wool suits. He looked terrified, clutching his cap in his hands, but he didn't step back. He stood his ground. And behind us, holding onto my arm for balance, was Eda May, the witness from the grave. Greg's reaction was immediate and visceral. It was the reaction of an animal that realizes the trap has snapped shut on its own leg. He knocked his chair over as he scrambled backward, putting the heavy defense table between us. "He is here," Greg screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch that sounded nothing like the smooth baritone he had used on the judge. He escaped. "Look at him. He is deranged." Officer, shoot him. He has a gun." The bailiff, a large man with a buzz cut, unclipped the retention strap on his holster. He stepped into the aisle, blocking my path. "Sir." "Stop right there. Put your hands where I can see them." I didn't stop. I kept walking. 1 step, 2 steps. The rhythmic thud of my shoes on the carpet was the only sound in the room besides Greg's heavy breathing. I said, "Freeze!" the bailiff shouted, drawing his weapon. I stopped then. I slowly raised my empty hands. I showed him my palms. I showed him the dirt under my fingernails. I showed him I had nothing but my scars. "I have no weapon, son," I said. My voice was low, gravelly, and filled with a calm that terrified Greg more than any shout could have. "The only weapon I brought is the truth, Your Honor," Greg yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He is violent. He attacked a nurse last night. He is off his medication. This is exactly what I told you. He is having a psychotic break right now. Remand him. Get him out of here before he hurts someone." Judge Harrison looked down from the bench. He looked at Greg, who was unraveling before his eyes. Then he looked at me. He saw the mud. He saw the entourage of misfits standing behind me. He looked confused, angry, and skeptical. "Who are you?" the judge demanded, his gavel hovering in the air. "And who are these people disrupting my court?" Saul stepped forward. He moved past the bailiff as if the gun didn't exist. He walked straight to the front of the room and slammed his briefcase onto the defense table right next to Greg's stunned lawyer. "I am Saul Goodman, Your Honor." Saul announced, his voice booming, "and I represent Mr. Moses Carter, the man you were about to erase from existence. And these are the ghosts Mr. Miller tried to bury." Greg's lawyer, Sterling, found his voice. "Objection. This is highly irregular. Mr. Goodman has no standing here. The order has already been signed." "The ink is wet," Counselor Saul shot back. "And unless you want to be added to the RICO indictment I am drafting in my head right now, I suggest you sit down and shut up." "RICO." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That is a heavy word, Mr. Goodman." "It is a heavy crime, Your Honor," Saul said. "We are talking about kidnapping. We are talking about wire fraud. We are talking about elder abuse. And we are talking about grand larceny." "Lies," Greg shrieked. He looked like he was about to vomit. "These are the ravings of a senile old man and a disbarred ambulance chaser." "Your Honor, please." Security Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down. Bang! The sound silenced the room. "Quiet," the judge roared. "Everyone sit down. Bailiff, lower your weapon, but stand by. Mr. Miller, if you shout one more time, I will hold you in contempt." He turned his gaze to me. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, "you are a fugitive from a medical facility. You are violating a court order. Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you handcuffed and transported to the psychiatric ward immediately." I lowered my hands. I looked the judge in the eye. "Because, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "the woman you think is dying in a hospital bed right now is actually drinking a mimosa at the Four Seasons Hotel. And I can prove it." Greg let out a scoffing laugh. It was forced, desperate. "See? He is delusional. He thinks my wife is at a hotel. She is on life support." "Show him Saul," I said. Saul opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a stack of papers. He pulled out an HDMI cable. He walked over to the court's AV station. Greg lunged forward. "No, you can't let them show unauthorized materials. This is a violation of privacy." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," the judge barked. Saul plugged the cable into the iPad. My daughter's iPad, the one I had carried against my belly all across the city. "May I?" Saul asked the judge. "Proceed," the judge said, leaning forward. Saul tapped the screen. The large monitors mounted on the walls of the courtroom flickered to life. The first image was a graph. A simple, colorful graph from the Apple Health app. "This, Your Honor," Saul narrated, pacing the floor like a ringmaster, "is the biometric data from Mrs. Vanessa Carter's Apple Watch. It is syncing in real time." He pointed to the screen. "As you can see, at 9:00 a.m. this morning, while Mr. Miller here was testifying that his wife was in a coma with escalating brain swelling, Mrs. Carter's heart rate was a steady 80 beats per minute, and she had already logged 4,000 steps." The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff looked at the screen. "Steps?" the judge asked, squinting. "Yes, Your Honor. Steps. Walking, dancing." Saul swiped the screen. "Here is the elevation gain. 12 flights of stairs yesterday. Impressive for a woman with a shattered spine." Wouldn't you say Greg's face was the color of ash? He was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. "This is fake," he hissed. "He hacked her account. He manipulated the data." "I expected you to say that," Saul said, smiling. "Which is why we have Exhibit B." Saul tapped a video file. It was the video I had recorded through the window of my own house just hours ago. It was grainy, yes. It was dark. But the image was unmistakable. It showed the interior of my dining room. It showed Greg holding a glass of wine. And it showed Vanessa. She walked into the frame. She was wearing a silk robe. She did a pirouette. She kissed Greg. She threw my photo albums into a box. The audio was muffled, but you could hear the laughter. You could hear the clinking of glasses. The judge stood up. He walked to the edge of the bench, his eyes glued to the screen. He watched the woman who was supposed to be on death's door dancing in her kitchen. That is today," the judge asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Time-stamped and geotagged. Your Honor, Saul confirmed. Mr. Carter took this video at 6 a.m. this morning after escaping the nursing home where Mr. Miller imprisoned him to keep him quiet. Saul turned to point at Carlos. And this man, Mr. Carlos Mendez, is the witness who helped him escape. He will testify that Mr. Miller placed Mr. Carter in a facility that is essentially a warehouse for the unwanted, stripped him of his phone, and isolated him from legal counsel. The judge turned slowly to look at Greg. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't the annoyance he had shown me earlier. It was the cold, hard fury of a man who realizes his court has been used as a weapon for a crime. Mr. Miller, the judge said. His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than a scream. Care to explain why your dying wife is doing ballet in her kitchen? Greg opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer. Sterling was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself physically from his client. Greg stammered. It must be old footage. It's a deep fake. They used AI to frame me. Then let's call the hospital, the judge said. Right now. Bailiff put Mercy General on the speakerphone. No, Greg shouted. He panicked. The facade cracked completely. He turned and bolted. He didn't run toward the door I had entered. He ran toward the side exit, the one reserved for court staff. Stop him, I yelled. The bailiff moved fast, but Greg was fueled by pure adrenaline. He shoved a table aside and scrambled for the handle, but he didn't make it, because someone was blocking that path. Eda May. She had been standing quietly by the wall, but when she heard Greg's footsteps, when she heard the frantic scrambling of his shoes, she moved. She didn't see him, but she heard him. She swung her heavy handbag filled with the few hard possessions she had left in this world blindly into the air. It connected with a sickening thud right into Greg's stomach. Oof. Greg doubled over, gasping for air. He stumbled backward, right into the arms of the bailiff, who slammed him face first onto the carpet. You have the right to remain silent, the bailiff shouted, clicking the handcuffs onto Greg's wrists. Greg writhed on the floor, turning his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with shock. You ruined everything. He screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. You old fool. You should have just died. I walked over to him. I stood over him, looking down at the man I had welcomed into my family. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I leaned down and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. I tried to tell you, Greg. I worked in logistics. I check every crate. I count every box. And you forgot to count on me. The judge was already on the phone, barking orders to the police dispatch. Get a squad car to the Carter residence immediately. Apprehend Vanessa Carter. And send a team to the Four Seasons. I want everyone involved in this brought before me by noon. He hung up and looked at me. His expression softened. Mr. Carter, he said, it appears the court owes you an apology. The order is vacated immediately. Your assets are unfrozen. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I turned to Saul. He was beaming. We did it, Moses, he said. We killed the dragon. I looked at Eda May, who was rubbing her shoulder where the strap of her bag had dug in. I looked at Carlos, who was smiling for the first time since I met him. We are not done yet, Saul, I said. I looked at the iPad screen where the graph of Vanessa's heart rate was still pulsing, strong, steady, alive. My daughter is still out there, I said, and she needs to know that her daddy is coming home. The courtroom was silent save for the hum of the projector fan. It was a silence so heavy you could feel the pressure of it against your eardrums. Every eye was fixed on the large screen mounted on the wall behind the judge's bench. I stood there, my hands resting on the back of the defense chair, feeling the vibration of the moment. This was not just evidence. This was an exorcism. We were dragging the demons out into the light. Saul hit the space bar on the laptop. The video began to play. It was dark and grainy at first shot from the perspective of a hidden camera wedged between two books on a dusty shelf, but the audio was clear. It cut through the courtroom like a knife. I saw my own living room appear on the screen. The familiar beige walls, the family photos, and then the intruders. Greg was sitting at my dining table pouring wine into a crystal glass. My crystal glass. He looked relaxed, arrogant, the master of a domain he had stolen. To the old man, Greg's voice on the recording said clear as a bell, "May he enjoy his new accommodations at the asylum." A gasp rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Then she walked in. Vanessa. On the screen, she wasn't the fragile, broken victim described in the medical reports. She wasn't fighting for her life. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered in the kitchen light. She walked with a fluid, easy grace. She walked over to the kitchen island, picked up a bottle of champagne, and did a little spin. A pirouette. It was a dance of pure, unadulterated greed. "Look at this," she said on the screen, holding up a stack of papers. He kept everything. Old tax returns. Receipts from 1990. God, he was such a hoarder. I can't wait to get a dumpster in here. Greg on the screen laughed. "Don't throw away the silver, babe. We can pawn that." I watched the faces in the courtroom. The bailiff looked sick. The court reporter had her hand over her mouth. They were watching a daughter celebrate the destruction of her father. It was primal. It was ugly. It was undeniable. Saul paused the video on a frame where Vanessa was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in her hand. He turned to the jury box, which was empty, but he addressed the room as if the whole world was watching. "Your Honor," Saul said, his voice low and dangerous. "This video was taken 6 hours ago. At the exact same time, Mr. Miller here was signing an affidavit swearing that his wife was in a medically induced coma at Mercy General Hospital." Greg, who was now sitting in the defendant's chair with his hands cuffed behind his back, looked like a man who was drowning on dry land. Sweat was pouring down his face, ruining his expensive collar. "It is a deep fake," Greg shouted, though his voice lacked any conviction. "It is AI generated. You can do anything with computers now. He made it up." The judge looked at Greg with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mr. Miller," the judge said. Silence. Saul didn't miss a beat. "A deepfake," Saul mused. "An interesting theory. But artificial intelligence usually struggles with biometric data. It struggles with the heartbeat of a living human being." Saul clicked the remote. The screen changed. Now, instead of the video, we saw a dashboard of data. It was a series of graphs and numbers brightly colored against a black background. "This, Your Honor, is the raw data export from Mrs. Vanessa Carter's iCloud account, specifically her Apple Watch health metrics." Saul pointed a laser pointer at the screen. A red dot danced over a spike in the graph. "Let's look at yesterday," Saul said. "October 14th. The day Mrs. Carter was allegedly paralyzed from the waist down and fighting catastrophic brain swelling." He circled the number. "Steps taken, 10,432. Saul let that number hang in the air. 10,000 steps, Saul repeated. "That is 5 miles, Your Honor. That is not the movement of a woman in a coma. That is the movement of a woman who spent the morning shopping and the afternoon at a spa." He moved the laser dot to another graph. "Floors climbed 12. Saul turned to Greg. "Did she climb 12 flights of stairs in her hospital bed?" Mr. Miller, was the bed vertical, or was she perhaps climbing the stairs to the VIP suite at the Four Seasons? Greg was shaking his head violently, his face turning a blotchy purple. It, Greg stammered. "It was physical therapy. The doctors, they have a new protocol, aggressive rehabilitation. They put her in an exoskeleton. It counts as steps." The courtroom erupted. Someone in the back row laughed, a short, shocked bark of disbelief. Even the judge's stoic expression cracked. He looked at Greg as if he had just claimed the moon was made of cheese. "An exoskeleton," the judge asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "For a patient with critical brain swelling." "Yes," Greg cried, desperate. "It helps the blood flow." "You don't understand modern medicine." Saul smiled. It was a wolfish smile. "Modern medicine is fascinating, Mr. Miller. But let's look at the heart rate." He pointed to the final graph. "Resting heart rate 62. Variability high. This is the heart of an athlete at rest. This is not the heart of a trauma patient in distress. A trauma patient's heart rate would be elevated, erratic. This heart is relaxed. This heart is enjoying a mimosa." Saul slammed his hand on the table. "This is fraud, Your Honor. Plain and simple, it is a conspiracy to commit grand larceny. It is perjury. It is the weaponization of the legal system to strip an innocent man of his life's work." Greg slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small. He looked like the child he really was, a child who had broken a toy and was now waiting for the punishment. I stood up then. My legs were tired. My body ached from the cold and the damp of the woods. but I felt lighter than I had in years. "Greg," I said. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "You said I was confused," I said softly. "You said I was paranoid. You said I was seeing things that weren't there." I walked closer to him, ignoring the bailiff, who tensed up but didn't stop me. "But I saw you, Greg. I saw you from the beginning. I saw the way you looked at my house, not as a home, but as an asset. I saw the way you looked at my daughter, not as a wife, but as a co-conspirator." I leaned down. "You thought because I was old, I was blind. You thought because I was kind, I was weak. But you forgot one thing about men like me. We built this city. We poured the concrete. We laid the steel. We know how to spot a crack in the foundation. And you, Greg, you are nothing but a crack." Greg didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, defeated. The judge cleared his throat. "Bailiff," the judge said. His voice was no longer the voice of a bureaucrat. It was the voice of the law. "Take Mr. Miller into custody. The charge is perjury, fraud, and whatever else the district attorney decides to throw at him. I am recommending no bail." Greg didn't fight as the bailiff hauled him up. He looked numb. As he was led away, he didn't look back at me. He didn't look back at the screen where his wife was still dancing on a loop. He just looked at the handcuffs on his wrists as if he couldn't believe they were real. The judge turned to the clerk. "Issue an immediate arrest warrant for Vanessa Carter. Location, the Four Seasons Hotel. Send a squad, and tell them to bring a wheelchair. If she wants to play sick, let's treat her like a patient. I want her transported directly to the county lockup." He looked at me. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, I don't know what to say. The court failed you today. We allowed this to happen." I looked at the judge. He was a good man, probably. Just part of a broken machine. "You didn't fail me." "Your Honor," I said, "you just didn't listen. But you are listening now." I turned to Eda May. She was sitting in the front row, her head cocked, listening to the sounds of justice. The click of the handcuffs, the scratch of the pen, the murmur of the crowd. "We did it." "Eda," I whispered. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. "I told you, Moses," she said. "The truth has a sound, and today it sounds like a heavy door slamming shut." I looked at the screen one last time. I watched my daughter spin. I watched her laugh. Goodbye, Vanessa, I thought. I hoped the champagne was worth it, because the bill had finally come due, and it was going to cost her everything. The bailiff pulled Greg up from the carpet, but the fight hadn't left him yet. He was frantic, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for an exit that didn't exist. The handcuffs were tight on his wrists, but his mouth was still running, spewing lies faster than the court reporter could type. "It is a mistake," he screamed, his voice bouncing off the mahogany walls. "I am a financial advisor. I manage millions of dollars. You can't treat me like a common criminal. That woman is lying. That old man is senile." The judge looked down at him with a gaze that could freeze water. "Mr. Miller, you are currently under arrest for perjury and attempted grand larceny. I suggest you save your breath for your attorney." "I have an attorney," Greg shouted, looking around for Sterling. But Sterling was gone. He had slipped out the side door the moment the handcuffs came out, leaving his briefcase and his client behind. Smart man, rats always know when the ship is truly sinking. Greg turned back to the judge, desperate. "You have to listen to me. My name is Gregory Miller. I am a citizen of this community. I have no record. You are making a huge mistake." I stood there watching him unravel. It was pathetic. It was ugly. But it wasn't over. We had taken his money. We had taken his freedom. But we hadn't taken his name. We hadn't stripped away the mask completely. Saul walked over to the defense table. He looked calm, almost bored. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor." Saul said, his voice cutting through Greg's hysterics. "The defendant claims his name is Gregory Miller. He claims he has no record, and technically he is right. Gregory Miller has no record, because Gregory Miller doesn't exist." Greg froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax statue. Saul turned to the back of the room. "Carlos, if you please." Carlos, my friend from the nursing home, stepped out from the shadows near the gallery. He was pushing a wooden wheelchair that belonged to the court. Sitting in it, small and frail but radiating a terrifying dignity, was Eda May. She didn't look like a witness. She looked like a grandmother. She was holding her worn handbag in her lap with both hands. Her blind eyes were fixed on a point in the distance, but her ears were tuned to a frequency the rest of us couldn't hear. Carlos wheeled her to the center of the room, right in front of the bench, right next to where Greg was standing with the bailiff. Greg stopped breathing. I could see his chest hitch. He knew who she was. He recognized her. Not by sight, but by the fear that suddenly flooded the room. "State your name for the record, ma'am," the judge said gently. "Eda May Robinson," she said. Her voice was soft, but in the silence of the courtroom, it sounded like a bell. "Retired Army Nurse Corps, service number 49021. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Robinson," the judge said. "Do you have something to add to these proceedings?" "Yes, sir," she said. She lifted her chin, sniffing the air. She turned her head slowly until she was facing Greg. She couldn't see him, but she knew exactly where he was. She could smell his cologne. She could hear the rapid, shallow breaths of his panic. "I don't know a Gregory Miller," she said. Greg let out a whimper. It was a small, broken sound. "But I know this man." Eda continued, pointing a trembling finger straight at his chest. "I know the smell of that sandalwood cologne, and I know the sound of that lie." She paused, letting the tension build. "His name is Gary. Gary Wilson." The name hit Greg like a physical blow. His knees buckled and the bailiff had to hold him up. "Gary Wilson," the judge asked, looking at Saul. Eda nodded. 10 years ago, I was a private nurse in Columbus, Ohio. I was caring for a woman named Martha Smith. She was 82, a widow. She had dementia, but she was happy. She loved her garden. She loved her cats. Eda's voice wavered, then steadied. Then Gary showed up. He said he was a distant nephew. He said he was there to help her with her finances. He wore nice suits. He brought her flowers. He called her Auntie. He fired the gardener. He fired the housekeeper. He isolated her. I watched Greg. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. "No," he whispered. "No, please." I heard him, Eda said, her voice rising. "I was in the kitchen. I heard him on the phone. He was laughing. He told someone, 'The old bat is signing the trust over today. I will pull the plug by Friday.'" The courtroom was deadly silent. I tried to stop him, Eda said, tears leaking from her milky eyes. I tried to call the police, but he found me. He told the agency I was stealing. He planted silver spoons in my bag. I lost my license. I lost my pension. And Martha. She took a deep breath. Martha died 3 days later. "Respiratory failure," the death certificate said. But I know what happened. He took her oxygen tank away. I heard the hiss of the valve being turned off in my nightmares for a decade. She leaned forward in her wheelchair, her blind eyes burning with a decade of unspent rage. He took $200,000 from that poor woman and vanished into the wind. I thought I would never hear that voice again. But then 2 nights ago in a hospital room in Baltimore, I heard it. I heard the same laugh. I heard the same arrogance, and I knew. The devil had come back. She lowered her hand. "You can change your name, Gary," she whispered. "You can wear a new suit. You can marry a new victim, but you cannot change the sound of your soul. It is rotten, and I can hear the rot." Greg collapsed. He didn't just fall, he disintegrated. He fell to his knees, sobbing snot running down his face. It wasn't a confession, but it was an admission. Saul stepped forward. "Your Honor, based on Ms. Robinson's testimony, my office ran a biometric voice print analysis on the recording Mr. Carter provided from his home security system against the FBI's cold case database." Saul pulled another paper from his briefcase. He handed it to the bailiff. "This is a warrant from the state of Ohio, outstanding for 10 years, for Gary Wilson. Counts include first-degree manslaughter, wire fraud, identity theft, and flight to avoid prosecution." The judge took the paper. He read it. His face went pale. He looked at Greg Gary kneeling on the floor. "Manslaughter," the judge repeated. "You killed her." Greg looked up. His eyes were wild. "She was old," he screamed. "She didn't know who she was. I did her a favor. I did them all a favor. They were just wasting space. Just like him." He pointed at me. "He is useless. Look at him. He is a drain on resources. I am the future. I am the one who knows how to use the capital. I deserve it." The bailiff didn't wait for the judge's order. He hauled Greg up by the armpits. "Shut your mouth," the bailiff barked. The judge stood up. He looked 10 feet tall. Bailiff, the judge said, his voice shaking with fury. Remand this man to federal custody and tell the marshals to add special circumstances. I want him on suicide watch. I want him in isolation. And I want the book thrown at him so hard he never sees the sun again. 2 more officers burst into the courtroom. They were wearing jackets that said, Federal Agent. Saul had called them. He had timed it perfectly. They took Greg. They didn't walk him out gently. They dragged him. He was kicking and screaming, cursing me, cursing Eda, cursing the world that had finally stopped tolerating his existence. I watched him go. I watched the door slam shut behind him. The silence that returned to the courtroom was different this time. It wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. The judge sat down heavily. He rubbed his face with both hands. Mr. Carter, he said. I stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked at Eda May. Ms. Robinson, he said, the court is in your debt. I am going to order the reinstatement of your nursing license purely for the record so your name is cleared. And I am going to ensure that the reward money for the capture of Gary Wilson, which I believe is substantial, goes entirely to you. Eda didn't smile. She just nodded. I don't want the money, she said softly. I just want to know he can't hurt anyone else. He can't. Eda, I said, putting my hand on her shoulder. He is gone. I turned to the judge. What about my daughter? I asked. The judge looked at his computer screen. The police are at the Four Seasons now, Mr. Carter. They have her in custody. She is being charged as an accessory. I nodded. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it was the only way. Can I go to her? I asked. The judge looked at me. He saw the father, not the victim. You are a free man, Moses. You can go wherever you want. I turned to Saul. Thank you, I said. Saul grinned, closing his briefcase. Don't thank me yet. You still have to pay my bill, and I charge extra for federal takedowns. I smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was real. Send it to the house, Saul. I am good for it. I looked at Carlos. Let's go, I said. I have one more stop to make. Carlos nodded. He grabbed the handles of Eda's wheelchair. We walked out of the courtroom. We walked out into the hallway past the reporters who were just starting to gather, smelling the blood in the water. We walked out into the sunlight. It was noon. The sun was high and bright. The rain was gone. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. But I wasn't done. I had to see her. I had to look her in the eye one last time. I had to say goodbye to the ghost of the daughter I loved and hello to the stranger I had just put in prison. I hailed a cab. To the precinct, I told the driver. The war was over. But the cleanup was just beginning. And that is always the hardest part. The interrogation room at the precinct was cold. It was a deliberate kind of cold designed to make people uncomfortable, to make them shiver until their secrets fell out of their pockets. I stood on the other side of the one-way glass for a long time just watching her. Vanessa was sitting at a metal table, her hands cuffed in front of her. They had taken her belt and her shoelaces just like they had taken mine at the nursing home. The circle was complete. The detective, a woman named O'Malley, who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, stood next to me. She has been asking for you, Mr. Carter, O'Malley said, taking a sip from a styrofoam cup. She waived her right to an attorney. She says it is all a misunderstanding. She says she wants to talk to her daddy. I looked at the woman in the room. She wasn't wearing the silk robe anymore. She was wearing a gray jumpsuit provided by the county. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked small. She looked like the little girl who used to wait for me on the porch steps when I came home from the shift. But I knew that little girl was gone. Open the door, I said. Are you sure? O'Malley asked. You don't have to do this. You have been through enough today. I have to finish it, I said. I started this war. I have to fire the last shot. O'Malley swiped her badge. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. I walked in. The air inside was thick and still. Vanessa looked up. When she saw me, her face crumpled. It was a masterpiece of performance art. Her lip trembled. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. She leaned forward as far as the chains would allow. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Oh my God, Daddy, I am so sorry. You have to help me." I didn't say anything. I pulled out the metal chair opposite her and sat down. The legs scraped against the concrete floor, a harsh grinding sound. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I looked for the daughter I had raised. I looked for the woman who had nursed Bernice when she was sick. I looked for a shred of humanity. But all I saw was calculation behind the tears. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, reaching out her hands. "You know I didn't mean to hurt you. It was him. It was Greg. He made me do it." I folded my hands on the table. "He made you?" I asked, my voice flat. "He made you fake a coma. He made you climb 12 flights of stairs at the Four Seasons. He made you throw my photo albums in the trash." Vanessa flinched. She wiped her nose on her shoulder. "He is manipulative, Daddy. You saw him in court. He is a professional con artist. He brainwashed me. He told me we were in debt. He told me we were going to lose everything if we didn't get money. I was scared. I just wanted to save our family." "Save our family," I repeated, "by putting your father in a cage, by medicating him until he lost his mind." She shook her head violently. "I didn't know about the nursing home. I thought it was a nice place. He told me it was a luxury facility." I reached into my waistband and pulled out the iPad. I slid it across the table. "Unlock it, Vanessa." She stared at the device. "Unlock it." She punched in the code with trembling fingers. 070406, the day her dog died. I opened her messages. I scrolled back to the day I was taken. I turned the screen around so she could see it. There was a text from Greg. "The package is delivered to the warehouse. He is locked down." And underneath it, a reply from Vanessa Good. "Make sure he doesn't have a view. I don't want him looking at the sky while we spend his money." I read the text out loud. My voice didn't waver. "Make sure he doesn't have a view," I repeated. Vanessa went pale. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The brainwashed victim act evaporated instantly. She realized she couldn't lie about the digital trail. So she switched tactics. She went from victim to daughter. "Okay, fine," she whispered, leaning in. "I was greedy. I made a mistake. But Daddy, I am your daughter. I am your little girl. We are family. You can't leave me in here. You can't let me go to prison." She looked at me with those big brown eyes, the eyes that had melted my heart 1,000 times. "I am all you have left," she said, her voice dropping to a desperate hiss. "Mom is gone. Greg is gone. If you send me to jail, you will be all alone. You will die alone in that house. Do you want that?" She was threatening me with loneliness. She was weaponizing my love. We share the same blood. "Daddy," she pleaded, "you can't turn your back on your own flesh and blood. It goes against nature. Please, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission. Please." I sat there for a long moment. I listened to the hum of the fluorescent lights. I thought about the 40 years I had spent working double shifts to buy her braces, to pay for her college, to buy her that first car. I thought about the nights I sat up with her when she had a fever. I thought about the pride I felt when I walked her down the aisle. Flesh and blood. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. My hand brushed against the burner phone, but I went deeper. I pulled out a leather wallet. It was old, cracked, shaped to the curve of my hip. I opened it. Hidden behind my driver's license, folded into a tiny square, was a piece of paper. It was yellowed with age. The edges were fraying. I unfolded it slowly. It was fragile. I smoothed it out on the metal table between us. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, wiping her eyes. "It is a document from 1989, I said. She squinted at it. It was a lab report, a paternity test. "You were 5 years old, I said, looking at the paper, not at her. "You needed a kidney surgery. Remember, you had an infection." She nodded slowly. I remember being in the hospital. The doctors needed to test family members for compatibility just in case I continued. They tested Bernice. They tested me. I tapped the paper. The results came back. Bernice was a match. I wasn't. Vanessa froze. "The doctor thought it was a mistake," I said. "He ran it again. Same result. 0% probability of paternity." I looked up at her. She was staring at me with horror. I went home that night and I asked Bernice. She cried for 3 days. It happened before we got married. She had a moment of weakness with an old boyfriend. She didn't know. Or maybe she did and she was too scared to tell me. Vanessa was shaking her head. No, that is not true. It is true, I said. I sat back in the chair. I had a choice that day, Vanessa. I could have walked away. I could have divorced your mother. I could have put you in the system. I was a proud man, a hurt man, but then I went back to the hospital. I saw you sleeping in that little bed, hugging your teddy bear. And I realized something. I leaned forward. I realized that being a father isn't about biology. It isn't about DNA. It is about showing up. It is about doing the work. So I burned the copy Bernice had. I hid this one. And I never spoke of it again. Not once. I raised you. I loved you. I worked my fingers to the bone for you. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of mourning. I loved you more than any biological father could, I whispered. Because every day I woke up and chose to be your dad. Even when you were difficult, even when you were ungrateful. I chose you. Vanessa was crying too, but it was different now. It was the crying of someone who realizes they have thrown away a diamond because they thought it was glass. And how did you repay that choice, I asked. You looked at me and you didn't see a father. You saw a bank account. You saw an obstacle. You used the bond. I built the bond I chose to strangle me. Daddy, I didn't know, she sobbed. It doesn't matter, I said. You played the blood card, Vanessa. You said I couldn't turn my back on my own flesh and blood. I stood up. I picked up the yellowed paper. Well, I have news for you. You are not my flesh. You are not my blood. I tore the paper in half, then in half again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the metal table like dead leaves. You are just a stranger who broke into my house, I said coldly. Vanessa screamed. It was a high, thin sound of absolute devastation. Daddy, no, don't leave me. I walked to the door. I knocked on the steel. O'Malley opened it immediately. Mr. Carter, she asked. I am done here, I said. Daddy. Vanessa shrieked, struggling against her cuffs. The chair scraped loudly as she tried to stand up. I am sorry, I love you. Please, I am your daughter. I stopped in the doorway. I didn't turn around. My daughter died 5 years ago when my wife died, I said to the empty hallway. Or maybe she never existed at all. I stepped out. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The silence in the hallway was heavy, but it was peaceful. I walked toward the exit of the precinct. My knee hurt. My back hurt. I was 73 years old, and I was alone in the world. But as I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the city sunlight, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had a friend named Carlos who needed a job. I had a friend named Eda May who needed a home. And I had a house that needed to be cleaned of bad memories. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and rain and wet pavement. It smelled like a new beginning. I pulled out the burner phone and threw it into the nearest trash can. Then I hailed a cab. Take me to West Baltimore, I told the driver. I have to pick up a friend. The meter started running. The car pulled away. I didn't look back at the police station. I looked forward at the road stretching out ahead of me. It was a long road, but for the first time in a long time, I was driving it on my own terms. The cab ride to West Baltimore was the longest journey of my life, even though it only took 20 minutes. I sat in the back seat watching the city roll by. I saw the playgrounds where I used to take Vanessa. I saw the ice cream shop where we celebrated her report cards. I saw the movie theater where she had her first date. The city was a map of a life that no longer existed. I felt like a ghost haunting my own history. But when the cab pulled up to the curb in front of that rundown row house where Eda was waiting, I realized that while the past was dead, the future was waiting on the sidewalk holding a plastic bag. Carlos was there too. He had pushed Eda's wheelchair out to the street and was standing guard over her like a sentry. When he saw me step out of the cab, his face broke into a grin that lit up the gray street. I told you I would come back, I said as I walked up to them. Carlos shook his head, laughing. I thought you were crazy, Moses. But then I saw the news on my phone. They arrested her. They arrested the daughter at the hotel. I nodded, feeling the weight of that sentence. Yes, it is done. Eda May tilted her head. She reached out a hand and I took it. You sound lighter, Moses, she said. You sound like a man who put down a heavy sack of rocks. I did, Eda, I said. But now I have an empty house, and I have a question for both of you. They looked at me. Carlos, I asked, how much do they pay you at that nursing home to scrub floors and get yelled at by people who don't know your name? Carlos shrugged. Minimum wage, boss. Barely enough for rent and my daughter's books. And you? Eda, I said, turning to her. Where will you go? The state will just put you in another warehouse. Another room with 4 beds and no air conditioning. She tightened her grip on my hand. I have nowhere else, Moses. I am blind and I am old. The world doesn't want people like me. Well, I said I don't want the world either. I am selling the house. Both of them looked shocked. The house, Carlos asked. But you fought for it. You almost died for it. I fought for the principle, Carlos. I fought to stop them from taking it. But now that I have it back, I realize it is just bricks and wood. It is filled with ghosts. Every room reminds me of a lie. I can't sleep there. I can't eat in that kitchen where she danced while I was locked away. I looked at them both. I am going to buy an RV, a big one. 40 feet of steel and diesel. I have always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. I want to see the Pacific Ocean. But I can't drive that thing alone. My knee is bad and my eyes aren't what they used to be. I squeezed Eda's hand. I need a navigator, Eda. Someone who can hear engine trouble before it happens. Someone who can smell rain coming from miles away. Eda's mouth fell open. You want a blind navigator? I want you, Eda. You saw the truth when I was blind. That makes you the best navigator I know. I turned to Carlos. And I need a chief engineer. Someone who can fix a radiator with duct tape. Someone who is strong enough to lift the heavy loads. I will pay you double what the nursing home pays, and I will cover your daughter's tuition for the next 4 years. Carlos stared at me. Tears welled up in his eyes. You are serious. I am as serious as a heart attack, I said, smiling at our inside joke. What do you say? Are we going to rot in this city, or are we going to go see the world? Carlos looked at Eda. Eda looked at the sky she couldn't see. Get me out of here, Moses, she whispered, before I change my mind. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. I didn't waste time. I called a realtor and listed the house on Elm Street. I sold it as his furniture included. I didn't want the sofa. I didn't want the dining table. I didn't want the bed. I wanted to walk out with nothing but the clothes on my back and the memories of Bernice that I carried in my heart. The day I signed the closing papers, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. The money from the sale, plus the money Greg had tried to steal, was now sitting in a new account, an account that only I controlled. I bought the RV the next day. It was a beast, a beautiful cream-colored Winnebago with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough sleeping space for a small army. We met in the parking lot of the dealership. Carlos had quit his job that morning. He told the supervisor exactly where he could shove his mop bucket. Eda was wearing a new dress I had bought her, a bright floral print that matched her spirit. I helped Eda up the steps. Welcome aboard the Freedom, I said. She ran her hands over the leather seats. It smells like new car, she said. It smells like possibility. Carlos jumped into the driver's seat. He revved the engine. The diesel motor purred a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Where to? Captain Carlos asked, looking back at me in the rearview mirror. I looked at the map spread out on the table. West, I said. Let's just drive west until we run out of road. As we pulled out onto the highway, I looked out the window. The skyline of Baltimore began to fade behind us. Somewhere back there in a concrete cell, Greg was waiting for his trial. Somewhere in a county lockup, Vanessa was realizing that actions have consequences. I thought about them for a moment. I thought about the anger I had carried for so long. But as the city disappeared, I let it go. I left it on the side of the road like a bag of trash. Hate is too heavy to carry on a road trip. I looked at my new family. Eda was humming a tune, tapping her fingers on the armrest. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a traveler. Carlos was smiling, singing along to the radio in Spanish. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He was a father providing for his child and a friend protecting his crew. And me, I wasn't the old man in the nursing home. I wasn't the victim of elder abuse. I wasn't the lonely widower. I was Moses Carter. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. We drove into the sunset, the golden light washing over the dashboard. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Bernice, I whispered to the empty air. I hope you are watching, because we are finally going on that vacation. The road stretched out before us, endless and open. And as the mile markers flew by, I realized that the best revenge isn't punishment. It isn't seeing your enemies suffer. The best revenge is living a life so full, so happy, and so free that you forget they even exist. I leaned back in my seat and watched the world go by. "Drive on, Carlos," I said. "Drive on." We spend our lives building castles for our children, hoping they will shelter us in the winter of our lives. But greed is a termite that eats through the strongest foundations of blood and duty. My story isn't about vengeance, it is about clarity. I learned that loyalty isn't inherited, it is proven. Sometimes the stranger in the next room cares more about your survival than the person who shares your last name. Do not fear the enemy who attacks you, fear the fake friend who hugs you. Protect your legacy, but more importantly, protect your dignity until the very last breath. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this one, and I want to know what you think. If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven Vanessa, or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments below. Stay strong, stay sharp, and I will see you in the next video.